Test, test. Board of Canvassers. Okay.
We've never done it before.
Okay.
She doesn't want us to include her property. The only thing you're voting on is whether
Well, that's like sitting on the west side. The guy's got a empty farmland. It's still 150,000 acres. So much.
Good evening. We would like to begin. This is a meeting of the Provo City Board of Canvassers, which consists of the City Council and the Mayor. It is 5:34 p.m., Tuesday, August 29th, 2017. And we're convened here in the council chambers. We're at 351 West Center Street in Provo. We'd like to begin the meeting with a roll call.
Cliff Strachan,
Brian Jones.
Gary Winterton, David Harding,
Kim Santiago.
Dave Sewell.
Dave Knecht.
George Stewart. John Curtis. Wayne Parker.
And we'll excuse Mr. Van Buren. So our first and only item of business is a resolution of the Provo City Municipal Council and Mayor sitting as the Board of Canvassers, accepting the election returns and declaring and certifying the results of the municipal primary elections held in Provo, Utah on August 15th, 2017. And this item will be presented by our city recorder, Janine Weiss.
Council members / Board of Canvassers, it's very nice to be able to present to you today. First of all, Bryce is putting up on the screen the official resolution that you will be approving tonight. The resolution just states that the results of the election, and there is a canvass report that you'll also be asked to sign. So I'm just going to review the canvass report with you. So, sorry, I gotta take these off so I can read. My husband has to put his on, and I have to take mine off, so it's like we're always like this. So on August 17th, 2017, Provo City held a primary election for the offices of Mayor, Council Member District 2, and Council Member Citywide 1. Provo City contracted with Utah County to conduct a vote-by-mail election. In Provo City, we had 41,798 registered voters. Of those 41,798, we had a total of 13,074 ballots that were cast for a voter turnout of 31.28%. And I have to tell you, that is higher than I even anticipated. I was hoping for the 20s, and we made 31, almost 32%, so that is great news. In the election, there were 866 provisional ballots cast at the Vote Service Center on Election Day. Of those 866 ballots, 16 of those ballots were not counted. 9 of them were not registered voters, and then the other 7 had issues with affiliation or had already voted. So that's a good thing. Bryce, if you want, could you pull up that provisional? I just think it's really interesting. The county sent us a report showing all the provisionals that were cast in each of the cities, and Provo City won hands down. I don't know if that's good or bad, but we had 866, and the next closest was Orem with 300 and something. I think part of that is because Orem, Lehigh, and Cedar Hills, several of them have already held vote-by-mail elections, so they were a little bit more comfortable with the process. And so this is something that I think Provo voters will kind of get used to, especially for the general, and I think our provisional numbers will go down drastically during the general election. Candidates, the resolution shows the total numbers of votes cast for each candidate, but the candidates nominated for offices and whose names will appear on the ballot on November 7th are, for Mayor, Michelle Kafusi and Sherry Hall Everett. For the citywide council position, Dave Sewell and Wesley Marriott. And for Council District 2, George Hundley and David Clark. Total votes for all the races can be found in the resolution, and then also there will be a statement of votes cast posted onto the city webpage, which lists each of the votes per precinct, by precinct for each of the candidates. It's a very convoluted report, but it's there and it's very interesting. And also our electionmap.provo.org has been updated to include all of the new numbers. So the general election will be held November 7th. And it will be conducted again, a vote by mail in conjunction with Utah County. And I certify that the information reported in this canvass report and accompanying resolution is accurate. So if there are any, one thing I might mention in the citywide 2 position, there are 11 votes separating the second and third place. So Hunter Phillips is 11 votes behind Wesley Marriott. So Hunter will have 3 days, if he chooses, 3 days to file a request for a recount. I have contacted Brian at the county, and he says they're prepared to start the recount whenever we get that request. Are there any questions? Dave? Oh, excuse me, Chair.
So we had near final results on Friday, and the only votes that hadn't been counted were the ones that might have been still coming in, presumably from overseas. I was just curious how many came.
6 votes.
6 votes?
Between it was 6 votes between Friday's update and today's.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention that the public documents has not been updated with the resolution, at least that I can't pull it up on the.
Oh, yes.
the
I
public
just,
documents
we
site.
received the canvas report from the county at about almost 4 o'clock, and so we've updated those. I've sent the updated resolution and the canvas report and all the supporting documents to Bryce and Brian, and they will be updating on the public documents.
Okay. I would just have, if they could scroll down slowly so we can actually look at it.
Why
that
don't
would
we
be
pull up
helpful.
the resolution?
Uh-huh.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
So, Janine, there's one other race that did not have a primary, and you might want to just mention that they're also still on the ballot.
Yes, and the canvas report, yes, they're still on the ballot. This canvas report simply reports the results of the primary election. Since there was not a primary election in District 5, yes, Mr. Harding will still be on the ballot, as will Miss Tanisha Zandamela, so yes. Thank you for reminding me that. So here are the results. The resolution goes through and it lists, the board certifies that 12,879 votes were cast for the office of Provo City Mayor. Of those votes, would you like me to read it or can we just? I can if you would like. 3,891 were cast for Michelle Kafusi, 2,677 for Sherry Hall Everett, 2,548 for Odell Minor, 2,220 for Larry Walters, 943 votes for Eric Speckard, 259 votes for Howard Stone, 165 votes for Kevin the Wingman Wing, 98 votes for John Finley, and 78 votes for Elliot Craig. So the board hereby certifies that candidates Michelle G. Kafusi and Sherry Hall Everett had the highest number of votes in the primary. And then in part 2, we have 11,965 votes were cast for Provo City Council member 1. I think it's interesting to note that there were more votes cast for the mayor race than the countywide, and yet the citywide, and yet they're both citywide. So sometimes that happens. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon that happens almost every single year. You always have 2 races that should have the same number, but for some reason people decide not to vote in one or the other. So of those 11,965 votes, 6,100 were cast for Dave Sewell, 2,099 for Wesley Marriott, 2,088 for Hunter Phillips, 1,678 for Mike Rohn. So as of today, we are certifying that Dave Sewell and Wesley Marriott had the highest number of votes. And then in District 3, we had 1,236 votes cast.
District 2.
Oh, excuse me, you're right. 653 for George Handley, 384 for David Clark, and 199 for Leo Lyons. So the board hereby certifies that George Handley and David Clark had the highest number of votes and will appear on the ballot. I will prepare this certified report. I have a copy of it right here with a signature page for each of the Board of Canvassers to sign. And then as soon as that's signed, we will post it on our webpage. I will send a copy to the Lieutenant Governor's office. And then we will also post it in the paper, probably on Saturday or Sunday. Any questions?
I've got a very quick question. Can
Okay.
we pull up that other slide that shows the provisional ballots? Provisional results.
It's interesting to see the number of provisionals that were cast. And I might add kudos to our Parks and Recreation Department for allowing us to use the multi-purpose room at the Eldred Center. It was just perfect. It gave us the room, and we apologize to the seniors for not having their lunch and bingo that day, but it's a good sacrifice, and thank you very much. It ran very smoothly. The vote service center was amazing. No problems at all.
Good. And now that I see it again, I no longer have my comment. Thank you. No question.
Okay.
Any more questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there, there's no public comment on this item. Is there any board discussion? Mr. Mayor.
This is a rare moment for me to make a motion, so I'd like to make a motion. But before I do, I would like, on behalf of all of us, to give a shout out to all the candidates throughout the city. We know it's no small thing to throw your name out there and to campaign, and I'd like to encourage those who weren't successful to stay involved with the city and think about running for future offices and getting involved on some of our boards. And with that, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the report as proposed.
We have a motion by Mayor Curtis. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Harding. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. Thank you. If there is no objection, we will declare this meeting of the Board of Canvassers adjourned by unanimous consent. Thank you. Now we would like to begin the meeting of the Provo Municipal Council and the Redevelopment Agency. We're met here in the Municipal Council chambers again. It's about 5:46 p.m. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo Channel 17, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that citizens help maintain the decorum of the meeting by turning off or silencing electronic devices, being respectful to the council and others, and refraining from applauding during the proceedings of the meeting. We'd now like to begin with a roll call.
Cliff Strachan.
Brian Jones.
Gary Winterton. David Harding.
Kim Santiago.
Dave Sewell.
Dave Connect.
George Stewart. John Curtis. Wayne Parker.
And Mr. Van Buren is excused. The opening prayer for tonight's meeting will be offered by Senior Officer Sean Parker.
Our Dearly Father, we're grateful for this opportunity to come together as a governing board, and as we meet together, we ask that they'll please watch over us and help us to make those decisions that would better our community as a whole. And we say these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We'll now be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Senior Officer Carter Groh. Thank you. We have one set of minutes to approve. These are for the July 18th, 2017 council meeting. Do any council members have any concerns or comments about this set of minutes? Seeing none, if there's no objection, we'll declare these minutes approved by unanimous consent. Thank you. We now have a presentation from the Provo Bicycle Committee of the Golden Spoke Award to the Police Department's Bike Patrol. And this is going to be presented by Austin Taylor from the Provo Bike Committee and Emily Gibb from Mad Dog Cycles.
Thanks to the council for having us. Each year, the Provo Bicycle Committee likes to showcase a bicycle commuter that is a good representative of riding their bike to work or to school. But this year we want to highlight a whole team of people that have been making biking safe for everybody in the city. So I'd like to have a video that the bike team actually made about themselves first.
I want to ride my I want to ride my bicycle.
So these guys are pretty hardcore, so hardcore that they don't even flinch from a huge explosion right behind them. So on behalf of the bicycle committee, we'd like to award them the Golden Spoke Bicycle Commuter Award. So if one of the representatives from the bike team wants to come up and accept it. So the award is presented from Emily Gibb. She's from Mad Dog Cycles, which is a bike shop that used to have a location in Provo, but they still extremely support all the bike things that happen here in Provo. And I just want to give a shout out to these guys. In my neighborhood, I was out about 2 a.m. one time and I just saw a whole fleet of them riding their bikes around looking for dangerous people, I'm not sure what, but they were doing a great job. And they've even agreed multiple times in the past to help create public events where we teach people about how to lock their bicycles safely. My educated estimate is that there's about 2,000 bicycles per year stolen in the city of Provo, and these guys want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So a big thanks to them.
Thank you very much. We now have an introduction of the new Provo Bay Neighborhood Chair, and this will be she'll be introduced by Karen DePahe, our Neighborhood Program Coordinator.
Hello, council members. As you know, with 34 neighborhoods, it's an ongoing thing that we get new neighborhood chairs. And in the Provo Bay neighborhood, we had a neighborhood chair, Sarah McNamara, who was able to be part of the West Side Planning Committee. But then after about a year, she ended up moving to a different city, and we had a very short vacancy. But fortunately, we were able to have an election in the Provo Bay neighborhood and elect a new chair, Gloria Anderson. And she also has two vice chairs, Erin McCullough and Wendy Newman. But Gloria is here today and wanted to give you a chance to meet her. Come on up.
Well, I'm happy to be a neighborhood chair. It's new for me. I was born in Virginia, and I still have a home back there, actually, that my brother takes care of. And I've lived lots of places: Phoenix, Boston, Grenoble, France, and Orem. And I feel passionate about the Provo Bay neighborhood. I mean, it is a beautiful area, peaceful, and with lots of green space and animals. And I hope that we can preserve a lot of that, because without it, we won't have the variety that we need in this area. And I don't want to look like Orem State Street. And so I'm really happy. I have 8 sons. Let's tell a little bit about myself. And they live everywhere but here. And they told me, the ones that live at, one lives in Chesapeake and one in Virginia. And they say they have tried really hard to preserve green space back there, and they do it by table to fork. They have places where people come and take care of animals and gardens, and they do everything they can to have polo clubs. And of course, they have wine and breweries, and that's a big draw for people, but not for here. And I'm hoping that we can do that. And I have a lot of people depending on me, thinking I'm going to save it from high-density housing, et cetera, but so help me. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your willingness to serve. Before we do our public comment, we're going to take care of one item of business out of order due to an applicant that has a flight tonight. So item number 8, which is an ordinance granting Mobile ID a non-exclusive franchise in order for it to operate a telecommunications network. And this item will be presented by, not Brian Jones, it looks like. Marcus Draper, thank you.
I spent some time speaking with people at Mobility, and we negotiated this franchise agreement to allow them to operate a telecommunications franchise in Provo City. As you would note in the memo that I supplied, that there are only a few changes from our standard template that would be considered of, I think, any sort of significance. And those are outlined in the memo in relation to, I think, making it a 10-year franchise as opposed to 5. Per our city ordinance, we're allowed to do telecommunications franchises anywhere from 5 to 15 years. Their request was for 10, and that's within that range, and I thought that reasonable. Additionally, paragraph 3.1 was reworked, and that is the calculation of the franchise fee. It's the same amount, the 3.5% of their gross revenues, but due to their somewhat different business model than your standard telecommunications franchise, some of the language had to be reworked to account for that, and that is the purpose of that modification. And in paragraph 5.2b, in order for them to apply for the right to erect a pole, monopole in Provo City to conduct their business, they are required to request permission from this council, and we just simply added language that the council's discretion needed to be reasonably exercised, which is, I think, something that we would expect from the council anyways. So those are the changes. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Let's see. We'll now open this item for public comment. Is there anyone that has come to comment on this particular item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring this back to the council for any discussion. Seeing none, we have an implied motion to pass the ordinance, and I will call for a vote on that motion. All in favor? The motion passes unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. All right, we'll now go back to our regular public comment period. As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, up to 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will be generally limited to 2 minutes. Additional time may be given to individuals specifically invited to speak, such as applicants, neighborhood chairs, or others that may be representing additional persons. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium. Seeing none, we will close the public comment portion of our meeting and move on to the remainder of our action agenda items. We are now on item number 3, which is an implied motion on a resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of up to $6 million aggregate principal amount of sales tax revenue bonds for the purpose of financing certain airport infrastructure facilities and related matters. And this is to be presented by John Borgett, our Administrative Services Director.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Sewell and Honorable Council. We did have a discussion on this just a few minutes ago in our work session, but we're here to answer any questions. This is a recommended resolution for the sale of bonds. We estimate that it would be approximately $5.5 million, but we put them up to a maximum of $6 million to just provide some flexibility if the bonds are sold at a premium or a discount, and to make sure that we can meet our needs. But Dan Follett's here if there was any desire to go through any specifics on the bonds or any questions, and I'm here to answer any questions possible. So,
Ms. Santiago.
I think for the public benefit, it might be helpful to go through a little bit of what, for those who haven't heard the work session discussion, just to talk about how these bonds will be paid back with tax increment, maybe just a brief
we would be happy to do that. Dan, do you want to come up and just kind of walk through what you went through in the work session?
And if I could request, Mr. Chair, obviously we'll need to vote independent or individually on these things, but I think items 3 and 4 and 5 are all fairly interrelated, and so if we're giving an overview, we may want to do it for all 3.
Thank you. That sounds like a good idea. While you're explaining that, could you mention kind of the relationship between these next 3 items?
You want to start with that, John, and then I'll go through the bonds?
Okay.
One thing that might be helpful, and I thought about this when I saw the order, it might be helpful for me to just kind of go over and talk about the project specifically, and then we could talk about the bonds associated with them, and then any redevelopment issues that are related to it as well. Does that work?
Sounds good.
Okay. If there's a memo that was that I went over in the work session, if we could pull that memo up. First of all, the project is out at the airport, and the city has been working for a number of years with a company named Duncan Aviation that would be coming in to do some major work on planes, jet aircraft in the facility. They actually are out there right now working on a little bit smaller operation. I would also mention that Steve Gleason is here, who's the airport manager, that could answer any questions specifically related as well. But the total project is $11,829,568 that would needed to be put in place for this facility to come to the airport. And the breakdown is there's some infrastructure updates of about $3 million, and then there's a ramp that would cost about $9 million for a total of approximately $12 million. The breakdown on the infrastructure improvements come from water, wastewater, stormwater, road improvements, ramp, and landscape areas for about $2.88 million. I would mention that I'll talk about the funding sources in a minute on how we would pay for those infrastructure upgrades. And then the actual ramp, the construction of the ramp, and what the ramp is actually a public ramp that the city would own, and it provides the ability to have access to the airport. So as these jet aircraft come and land and are prepared to be serviced, they would access the ramp to get to the new Duncan Aviation facility. I would also say that we could have other businesses that would come in that would service aircraft or would need access, and they could use that same public ramp. And that cost is about $7.1 million, and then the design and construction management process related to it is $654,000. The overall issuance costs for the bonds are approximately $80,000. The bonds that are going to be issued associated with this, they would be paid back through tax increment that's generated from the new building that Duncan Aviation would build. And takes a couple years to build that facility, and so we've included some capitalized interest to service interest on the first 2 years until the property taxes are generated from the building that would provide the increment that would be used to repay back the bonds. And then there's also some contingency of 10%, so if we have any unexpected expenses, we've allowed about $700,000 or 10% contingency on the ramp construction if there were anything to come up. I would mention, though, that we do have solid, firm contracts for the construction of the ramp and then also for the design and construction management services. And so hopefully we won't need the contingency, but it's there just as there to be able to fall back on. Now, the overall funding sources, I would mention that there's been a lot of time and effort, and I think it's been well planned and designed to provide for this construction. First of all, there's something that's called a 108 loan, and it gives the ability to get reimbursed for the infrastructure that I talked about, that $2.88 million, through CDBG funds. And this was discussed with the council on a number of occasions earlier, and so the $2.5 million would be paid back over 10 years with CDBG funds. We also qualified and received an EDA grant, which would pay for the construction of the ramp. And I would mention that this, it only handles the areas that would be true public access. And so we actually received $3.5 million award, but the amount that actually qualifies is about $6.6 million, and so the amount that we would receive on the match would be $3.228,641. And then the bonds that we're going to discuss in just a few minutes that would be provided funding would be about $5.5 million, and those would be paid back over a 15-year amortization, and it's actually a total of 17 years with the capitalized interest, and that money comes back from increment. And I would mention that the school district has agreed to participate, as well as the county and the Metropolitan Water District and the city. And so each of the property tax that each of these entities generate from this new building would be used to service these bonds over the next 17 years. But the property tax would actually start 2 years from now, so it's a 15-year bond that would be issued. And so that totals the $11,829,000 that is the total project. And then earlier in the year, back in January, the council appropriated $300,000. And so we subtract that $300,000, and that came as a transfer from the general fund to the airport capital improvement project. And that was primarily to allow us to start paying for some of the design and management construction costs. And so the total appropriation is going to be the $11,529,000, and then we're recommending a transfer of $288,000 because we had already done the $300,000 before. And so that's a little bit of an overview of the project. I know that this discussion has been going on and planning for over 10 years, and so Duncan came very close to coming, and then when the economy went south, they weren't able to do it, but now they're excited and we're moving forward with the project. Any questions on the overall project? Okay, Dan?
Thank you. John mentioned several aspects of the bonds. I'll just mention that the council's being asked to approve up to $6 million worth of bonds. John noted that we would probably only issue about 5.5 million, but that's normal for a parameters resolution because it allows our bond council and our municipal advisors in the city to work together and structure the bonds to where it's the most advantageous for the city, which may include a premium or discount, which could increase or decrease the number, the actual principal amount of the bonds. The other thing I would mention is these are sales tax revenue bonds, meaning that they're secured by sales tax revenue. The source of repayment, as John mentioned, is going to be tax increment from the improvements that Duncan Aviation makes out at the airport. The reason we structure them that way is that sales tax revenue bonds are viewed very favorably in the marketplace, and that gives us the lowest possible rate. And if we were to issue today, we believe the rate would be somewhere in the range of about 2.6%. We will actually use a competitive sell to sell these bonds on October 3rd. We'll do that the morning of October 3rd. That's the same day as a regularly scheduled council meeting. We'll choose the most favorable terms that are put forth that day in the competitive sale process and bring those back to the council during the regular council meeting on October 3rd. And the council at that point will be able to make a decision as to whether or not they approve and are comfortable with those terms or they disapprove of those. And if they disapprove, then we would not move forward with the issuance of those bonds. John mentioned that we will capitalize interest during the first 2 years while improvements are made by Duncan Aviation that ultimately will provide the tax increment to repay the bonds. The repayment of the principal will be over a 15-year period of time. And again, we're in a very favorable interest rate environment right now. We anticipate that that will continue to be the case through the October 3rd sale date. If for any reason it wasn't, the council would have the option to decline the sale of bonds that takes place on that day. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
I would just make one other mention. The third item that's related to this is would be part of an RDA session, and David Walters is here, but I don't know if you want him to discuss that now or wait and reconvene the session and talk about the other component.
Probably wait until we reconvene. Yeah. All right, this item's open for a public hearing. Is there anyone who's come to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the council for any discussion. Mr. Winterton.
Just a question. I remember when this was first discussed, the state was quite also excited. Is that what EDA, was that where we're getting some of those fundings from the state for the matching fund, or where do those funds actually come from?
So the EDA refers to the Economic Development Administration, which is a federal arm of the federal government, and they are providing up to $3.5 million because of the nature of some of the improvements that'll be made at the grant. We're only anticipating that'll be 3.2, but so we've been approved for up to 3.5 for a total of $7 million for the ramp that Duncan would need.
Did the state? I remember when we talked about.
Yes, the state is interested in is working with Duncan, but that's not a part of the. That would be monies that would be directly paid to Duncan and not as a part of the things that we're talking about here tonight. So it's just the federal portion in the Economic Development Administration.
Thank you.
There's no further discussion. We have an implied motion to pass the resolution, and I will call for a vote. All in favor? The motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. We'll now move on to item number 4, which is an implied motion on a resolution appropriating $11,529,568 in the airport fund Airport Improvement Project Division for funding infrastructure improvements to the airport applying to the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018. Was there anything else you wanted to add related to that at this time? Mr. Borgett?
No, just unless you have any additional questions.
Any questions specific to this item?
Okay.
Thank you. This item is open for a public hearing. Are there any members of the public that would wish to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the council for any discussion. Ms. Santiago?
I just have a question for Mr. Jones. So the only part that we're appropriating from the general fund is the just under 300,000, and that's not specifically mentioned in the resolution. Is that a problem, or?
Sorry, I'm going to have to open the resolution really quick. And your question is about the transfer from the general fund?
The transfer from the general fund, oh, it is right there. It is right here in the third whereas, so it's right there.
And we've had discussions about this in the past, and my understanding is where it's a transfer, okay? It's not an appropriation, it is a transfer, and so it is the use of general fund funds, but it's not in itself a transfer, and it is identified in the overall appropriation, so I think we're okay.
Okay,
That's correct.
thank you.
If there's no further questions or discussion, I'll call for a motion to approve the implied motion to pass this resolution. Pardon?
You said call for a motion, but you meant call for a vote.
Thank you. I meant to say call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor? And the motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. I'll now look for a motion to adjourn as the Municipal Council and reconvene as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Harding, moved by Mr. Winterden, seconded by Mr. Harding. All in favor?
The written agenda doesn't show us an implied motion. Is that a mistake, or can we have an implied motion of an RDA action?
Yes, that's just an oversight. It should be an implied motion.
We have an implied motion for a resolution authorizing the execution and delivery of a tax increment pledge agreement and a development agreement relating to the construction and financing of certain airport infrastructure facilities and related matters. Mr. Walters will make a presentation.
Chair Stewart, members of the Redevelopment Agency Board, this item was to approve the development agreement. We do. Staff would ask council's indulgence in that Duncan is just waiting to get final approval for the legal description before signing the agreement. They've been working with their architect, and so they have not signed it yet. They've indicated their willingness. So we would ask that you would continue this item till the next Redevelopment Agency meeting. The item is to allow Duncan to go ahead and proceed with their $73 million worth of investment. And the tax increment pledge that accompanies this is designed to help solidify that number so that everybody feels comfortable moving forward with the bond issuance and the financing arrangements that have already been discussed. Duncan is committed to working in Provo and developing in Provo. They just need to finalize with their geotechnical and engineering consultants that the legal description is correct. So,
Any questions for Mr. Walters?
Just one with the bonding coming up fairly quickly here. When does that, that's the 3rd?
It's the 3rd, and I would just state that it's essential that this agreement signed and approved before then. So if it were done and completed on the 19th of September, we would be fine. But it is essential that it's done on the 19th so that we're ready to go on the 3rd for the final sell.
And you don't see any problem with that being done by the 19th?
Thank you.
thank you.
We'll open this for public comment. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council. Looking for, since this is implied motion, is there a second?
Mr. Chair, I would move that we continue this to the September 19th meeting,
Come again?
as was suggested.
Yes.
You suggested continuing it, so, but the implied motion is being overridden by another motion to continue.
No, there's a motion continue by,
And I'll second it.
okay, all in favor? Looks like we'll continue this. I call for a motion to adjourn the redevelopment agency at Provo meeting and reconvene as municipal council of Provo. Is there a second? Motion? I'll move. Is there a second? All in favor?
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. That brings us to item number 6, which is a resolution approving an environmental assessment and a proposed land and water conservation fund property conversion. And this item is to be presented by Thomas McKenna, our Parks Projects Coordinator.
Thank you, Honorable Council, for hearing this agenda item. Back on the 8th, we presented the draft environmental assessment for the land and water conservation conversion project. We did receive some comments, and we've since then have integrated those comments into the final environmental assessment. Those comments were that a neighborhood committee be formed to finalize the concept plan. So when it is approved by the federal government, then we will form a committee to finalize the plan before it's constructed. And we'll work closely with the neighborhood there. And we'll also consider future access points to the north side of the river. Those will be considered as well. And those were the only comments that we did receive. So we would like to have this resolution approved for this environmental assessment. Is there any questions from the council?
Thank you. This item is open for a public hearing. Are there any members of the public which have come to comment on this item?
Hi, Council. Thank you for the opportunity. My name's Brett Daly. I'm a resident of Provo. I've lived in the Fort Utah neighborhood for, I was doing the math, something like 21 years, 22 years. I've actually have access to this property for about that long. I befriended, I lived on 2770 West that backed up to this, the Rivers neighborhood before it was developed, and befriended a police officer that was running his horses back there. This is a fantastic piece of property. The proximity to the river, a stream that runs through it. I've observed so much nature that's very interesting, some unusual things. And so I'd be very interested in participating in the neighborhood group that decides what you're going to do. I looked at the general concept, and Mr. Harding, you asked about linking to other properties. That's actually a smaller, that's 1.56 acres, and the city actually owns 5.12 acres right there. And the plan currently doesn't really provide access to all that property. It's fantastic. It's something that could make this area really cool, so I hope we look at that. And you can actually walk down the Levee Road through a piece of city property up onto the Lakeshore Bridge and connect with the river trail on the north side. Now, I walk that walk all the time. It's fantastic. My one concern was about the understory being removed. This is a really prolific, because there's so much water in there, very prolific growth. There's on and off for a decade, we've had burrowing owls back there. I know that's a species of concern. Fantastic to watch them. I've seen all kinds of things. So again, the plan as it is doesn't provide protection for that wetland. I would love to see people get over that wetland because everyone wants to go on the river. There's going to be a bridge there one way or the other. It's either going to be provided by the city or kids are going to put, like they do now, logs, rocks, concrete to get across that wet area. So I hope we, again, I'd love to be involved, and I see my time's up, and thank you for listening. Oh, there's a couple things about your resolution that are interesting. On page 6 of the guidelines from the state, it says that the public comment period should be no less than 30 days, and you're a little bit under that. And I know you're probably under some scrutiny because you're out of compliance on this property, so you might want to extend it just a little bit to get past that 30 days. And on page 17, it says that the existing concrete path in there was constructed by others. It was actually constructed by the city, and you maintain it, and it's beautiful, and you do a fantastic job of it. So those are a couple points about the resolution itself, or the EA itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, are you aware of any problem with the public comment period for this, or do we need to?
Well, we might want to defer to Parks. What I can't remember off the top of my head is what started the public comment period. I do think that the resolution refers to 30 days, but I don't know when. I don't know off the top of my head when we started that.
I think it says the 8th. You presented it to council. I could be wrong. I think you're just a little short.
Mr. McKenna, do you have a comment on that?
The public comment period started July 1st, and it ended on the 8th of August. So that was the period. So it was actually more than 30 days.
Okay, thank you.
So it looks like we've got just an error in the resolution where at line 24 it says that it began on August 8th. So we probably just need to strike that and say began on July 1st and ended on August 8th.
Yeah.
Can you insert that, Bryce? Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. Are there any other members of the public that have come to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring this back to the council for any discussion. Ms. Santiago?
So if members of the public would like to be part of that group, that steering committee, I don't know what you're calling it, but who do they contact? How do they apply to be part of that?
So we'll work closely with Jonathan. I can't remember. Sorry, his last name is blanking, but Hill. We'll work closely with him, and then they can contact the neighborhood chair as we go through that process.
Okay.
Just want to kind of add on to that I hope you work with the immediate neighbors that are the most affected, so they feel like they're part of the process and have a real say.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Then I think we will, yes, Ms. Santiago.
I had one other question. He also mentioned, Mr. Hill mentioned that, can't remember what you call it, but there was a car that was creating some sort of a barrier or something. Wasn't there a structure? I think it was a car. Is that what you were talking about, that was a natural habitat for the owls, or was it something else?
Yeah, there's an old rusted car kind of down on the levee, but that's actually not on that property. There's two other little parcels that's owned by a private company that developed a neighborhood one over, and so it's not on that property.
Okay, so was it underbrush? What was it that you were worried was going to be removed?
Yeah, so the current plan has that we'd remove the understory and create a loop path. And that understory right there is really productive for wildlife, and that's where we've had burrowing owls for a while, on and off for years. They're fun to watch. I've seen whole families grow up there. And like I said, this property, I'm really excited that we're doing more with it. You've done a little bit to get access, but doing more will make the neighborhood and other citizens of Provo have a really slice of nature there that's really unique, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Mr. McKenna, as you go through this process, those types of things will be addressed, I'm sure, for endangered species, and those kinds of things will all be addressed within the environmental. Okay, thank you.
All right, if there's no further council discussion, I think we'll need a motion to amend the original draft as indicated on the screen. Motion by Mr. Stewart. Second by Ms. Santiago. All in favor? Okay, so we now have the draft in front of us as indicated on the screen. Look for a motion to pass that.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Stewart. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Winterton. Any further discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. We'll now move on to item number 7, which is a resolution authorizing the mayor to approve an application for a burn justice assistance grant and to execute an interlocal cooperation agreement with Utah County related to the 2017 Burn Justice Assistance Grant Program, and this will be presented by Devin Jensen, Police Lieutenant, or not.
Devin Jensen has a meeting out of town, so I'm representing him. I'm Nadia from Finance.
Great.
So in the fiscal year 2018, Provo City has been awarded $21,943, and we receive this grant every year. And so the Provo Police Department, they have decided they want to spend the whole money on tasers.
Okay.
Yeah, so they are saying for our current budget, we do not have enough to cover all. So this money will be spent on tasers because they also need periodic replacement. Any questions?
Mr. Harding?
Yeah, I was curious. I guess I don't understand, why do we need an interlocal agreement if Provo was awarded the whole amount? Then why do we need that agreement?
Every year we have to sign the interlocal agreement with Utah County to make sure that we are not sharing the money with them. So only Provo is receiving that money.
So we're just agreeing with them that we won't share money with them.
I remember this last year.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. This item is open for public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring this back to the council for any discussion. Seeing none, we have an implied motion to pass the resolution. I will call for a vote to pass the implied motion. All in favor? The motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. I also wanted to point out, in case anyone is here for item number 14, which is an ordinance amending the Stormwater Service District fee schedule. We voted today in work meeting to continue that item, so you don't need to stay if you're here for that. So we'll now move on to, since we already did item number 8, to item number 9, which is an ordinance amending Provo City Code to make city noticing requirements consistent with state law, and this will be presented by Brian Maxfield, Planning Supervisor.
Thank you.
This item is an effort by the city to amend the code to become more consistent with the state code in regards to noticing requirements. Specifically, it changes the first subsection dealing with the first public hearing before the Planning Commission as to what the noticing requirement is. It's a little bit different in the state code to what it was with the city, and just trying to make that the same time period. And then later on in subsection 4, it just changes the wording on how we refer to the Utah code on that subsection. Any questions?
Bryce, this isn't the right version. Did you get the email that I sent to Kelsey that it was missing language? If you don't have that, I can send it to you. The one in Sire is the right one. Can you pull that one up?
Yeah, this is the piece
The concept is all the same as Mr. Maxfield said. It's just that when it looks like when it was copied and pasted, there was just some language left out of paragraph 1. The one that was in Sire as of Thursday, I believe, has all of the correct language in it.
So we don't have up on the screen the current one at this time?
That's correct. Bryce is working on getting it up.
Okay. Thank you.
Keep going down to the exhibit. There we go. That's the right one.
Mr. Jones, I wonder if it might be worth you just taking a moment to just briefly review sort of the clarifications involved with this and how it differs from what...
Sure, I'd be happy to. The main issue here is that in state code, something that was not clear in city code is that state code distinguishes, when we're talking about land use ordinances, for example, zoning amendments and other amendments to the land use code, state code distinguishes between public hearings and public meetings. And it specifically specifies that the first consideration of such an item before the Planning Commission is a public hearing, and therefore requires 10 days public notice, but that subsequent meetings on that item, including consideration of the Planning Commission's recommendation by the City Council, is only a public meeting rather than a public hearing, and only requires 24 hours notice. The way this section was previously written was very confusing because it talked about public hearings being required by this title. It had long been, there was a long custom of interpreting that to mean any amendment to Title 14. But if you look closely at Title 14, there are only, I think, 2 instances where something that happens in front of the City Council is actually required to be a public hearing by Title 14. So it imposed a noticing requirement of 14 days that on its face most people assumed applied to everything, but really didn't if you understood the technicalities of the way the statutes worked. So we met and discussed and proposed amending it in this way to make clear the distinction between public meetings and public hearings, and to make clear that in both cases we would comply with state law in issuing those notices. Now, it's probably useful also for the public to know that although this amendment to the section of the code means that we are only required by law to notice a public meeting of the municipal council on a land use item with 24 hours notice. We have actually recently adopted a new procedure in the council handbook and rules in agreement with the Community Development Department, where the Community Development Department is going to start noticing public meetings of the council's consideration of land use items at the same time that they notice consideration of those items by the Planning Commission. That actually means that there will be at least 16 days of notice before the first hearing by the City Council. So while this section just simply clarifies that we will comply with state law, our procedure is actually to give considerably more notice than that.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there any discussion on this item? Mr. Knapp.
I would just like to thank Chairman Sewell and everyone else that worked on this, Brian, to show what the reality is and to bring us into compliance and to give us a longer notice, really. But even though it appears to be and functionally is a longer notice, we've tightened up how things are going to work and proceed going forward. So it's just a good job, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Knapp. If there's no further comments, I will call for a vote on the implied motion.
Did you open it for public comment? Did
I open it for public comment? I don't think I did I? Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. We've got several people today that have been keeping me on track here. I will now open this item for public comment. Any members of the public wish to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the council for any discussion. Seeing none, I'll call for a vote on the implied motion to pass this ordinance change as indicated on the screen. All in favor? The motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. We'll now move on to item number 10, which is an ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 58.6 acres of real property generally located at 1500 South State Street from light manufacturing M1 to one family residential R110. And this item will be presented by Bill Pepperoni, Assistant Director of Community Development, or his designee, Austin Corey.
The item that's before you is an extension of the neighborhood plan that was adopted a number of years or a number of months ago. We've discussed it at Planning Commission a couple different meetings, and in your work session a couple meetings. Your last council hearing, the council chose to continue the item to gather some further information. The only thing that we have as planning staff to report is that initially, Mr. Rush Jacobson had requested to be excluded from the rezone request. He has since spoken with our department and spoken in favor of being rezoned. He has an interested buyer who is negotiating price with him right now that is looking to do a residential project, much like the the rezonings that have occurred or that's being requested.
So the buyer is not going to pay him R110 price, right? He's paying for what the property could be used.
I can't tell you the details of that. I don't know.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Bill knows.
Are there any questions for Mr. Corey? All right. This item is open for public comment. Are there any members of the public that have come to comment on this item? Oh, I should have asked, is the applicant or the property owner here? Oh, there you are. One of them.
Joy Petro, Layton City.
Council. It's an honor to be here again, and like I had mentioned before, our family has always been willing to kind of work with the city and try to mitigate any issues or problems that we've had with this particular piece of property. I'm speaking on behalf of the 4.77 acres that's at the south end of this rezone map area. And what I'd like to present to you tonight is the fact that you know, we took your consideration and opened it up and for, you know, some additional use. If you recall, last time I was here, we were wanting to put storage sheds on the partial. Since then, we've had some a change of plan. There's been some other interested parties, and quite honestly, all of them want to go with multifamily, not R110. They do not want to do single residential. So what I'd like you to consider tonight is to please accept our particular portion of the zone map to be zoned for high-density multi-dwelling instead of R110. That's it.
Thank you. This is a regional item. I think we do have a neighborhood chair here. Would you like to speak to this item?
Mary Miller, Spring Creek Neighborhood Chair. The main reason, as was already stated, the whole reason that this was proposed is because it's part of that Southeast Area Plan. We were hoping for an LDR in that area, obviously thinking that as each development came in, we could then look at it and decide, could it handle MDR? Can the streets and everything else down there in Southeast Provo handle an MDR? I was surprised when the Planning Commission came back with an R110. It surprised me, but I thought, well, if you think that's going to work better, you folks are the ones who are able to make a final decision on that. The biggest concern is to keep whatever goes in there in agreement with what we've set out in that Southeast Area Plan. So it kind of changed a little bit. You know, we've watched the storage units come in. They're under construction. That's exciting. They look new and fresh. But I don't think we really needed another one, as we have 5 in that area of town. So this makes 6. So, yes.
So Mary, the Southeast Area Plan, the final version calls for this area to be medium density residential. When it went before the Planning Commission, it was proposed that it be initially LDR, which would give the neighborhood and the council one final look at the product before it was rezoned to MDR. And their response was, well, if you did rezone it LDR and somebody just came in and bought that zone and wanted to build that zone, then you wouldn't have any final say. You wouldn't have any final review.
So there wouldn't be another review then?
Yes. So they recommended, in order to get a final review on MDR or LDR, that you put it down to R110, realizing that nothing is ever going to be built at that level, that the property would be valued and built at the maximum allowable density as per the general plan, which in this case is MDR.
And you know, again, we're okay with that. It's just when the storage units came in, that's not what we were expecting. You know, we had looked at some really marvelous, and I believe, I don't remember. Bill, were they MDR or LDR? Miller.
Miller's going to be LDR.
Okay, so, and it was a beautiful plan. It was absolutely beautiful with, you know, some little shops on the bottom, residences up top. I think it would have been awesome, but that's gone. And now we have storage units. And I don't think that it's legal for anyone to live in a storage unit, at least not in this city.
So one other thing, the neighborhood plans, when they come forward, generally are not accompanied by any rezone request sponsored by community development is just, the plan is a recommendation. And so we get a rezone request typically by the neighborhood chair asking, or a developer, or in this case, I asked that we look seriously at rezoning the properties in this area because we were getting things approved with the underlying zoning that did not go with the long-term vision.
Right. Right. And so that's really what I meant when I used the word control. It's just that if we make a plan, then we need to make the steps along the way as well to make it happen. And so here we are.
And could you remind us of, in that neighborhood master plan, how is this area described?
I think at one point, I do remember them saying MDR with batching singles, that kind of thing. However, when the school came in, that changed a few things too. Not that we're not happy with it, but it changes things. And so just being able to watch and hopefully get the right kind of development in, that will be beneficial to the neighbors and most assuredly to the city. So I don't really have anything else to add.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any members of the public that have come to speak to this item?
Yes, so my name is Riley Sorensen. This is my mom, Debbie Sorensen. We're the owners of the Bear River Storage and also the new owners of what was the Olson property, the little .16 that has tires, and it's kind of a dill there. But we also agree with the Petrofessa family that a higher density would be better. The only concern we have is approaches, the in and out for the higher density, but we believe that that .16 is critical in making that happen, and we're willing to work with the new developers to make a high density situation work there. So, but yeah, we're just in favor of that, the higher density overlay. So, thanks.
Can I ask a quick question, a clarification? So the neighborhood master plan calls for MDR density, which is up to 30 units per acre. So does that fit your definition of high density, or is that?
For me, it's not for me to speak to that. I'm not really sure, but we think that in that area, higher density makes more sense. And the parcel, the .16, really needs to be incorporated with this new way forward. And so we really need to work with these new people who are going to develop it. And that's where we come in, is we can say, look, the approach in and out, we can make that far easier with UDOT. We worked with UDOT on our current project and are very willing to move forward and work with anybody else that wants to develop a higher density. So,
thank you.
Good evening. David Malone. I represent the buyer and the developer. The last meeting, July 18th, we discussed the zoning of the Petrofessa parcel. At that time, our development team was pursuing Zone M1 to build a storage facility. The council asked us to do some due diligence on whether residential would be feasible with regards to the Petrofessa parcel. In the last 6 weeks, we have determined medium density product of 24 units per acre or more would be feasible and would work very well on the Petrofessa parcel. As addressed by the council last meeting, this new South Provo overlay would be zoned R110, with the council's understanding that many of the overlay areas would become medium to high density residential zoning. We ask the council this evening to amend the current overlay of R110 for the Petrofessa parcel and change the Petrofessa parcel zoning to a medium density residential designation. The zoning change will protect the integrity of the Petrofessa's property value and give Provo City a fantastic residential product, which is what you, the council, and Planning Commission ultimately want to see happen in this area. This will ultimately help set the precedent for similar development in the future for this area. The Petrofesas have a ready, able, and willing buyer now. Provo City has a ready, able, and willing developer to develop the Petrofesa property as the master plan dictates. This is a win-win for the city of Provo and the Petrofesa family, who have owned this parcel for 30-plus years and have been part of Provo for the past 50 years. We look forward to working with the city and starting the rebuilding process for South Provo. I do want to address the 0.16 acre parcel. Due to the comments made last meeting, opposing to make any decisions without the inclusion of the 0.16 acre parcel apparently sparked a third-party interest for the 0.16 acre parcel with no interest of developing, but rather just a leverage against us to make money. To our understanding, a third-party buyer has already bought the parcel. At this point, the 0.16 acre land is not an option without exorbitant premiums due to the comments implying that the 0.16 would dictate the use of the entire 4.77 acre Petrofesa parcel. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, we're taking public comment right now. We haven't asked for you to come back up at this point. Yeah, yeah.
Is there a time that we can address the comments that were just made?
I'll consider that. Thank you. Are there other members of the public that wish to speak to this item?
Chase Paulson of Alpine City. I am also a representative of the buyer. I'd just like to point out in the handbook for planning commissions and land use authorities, which is outlined by the state of Utah, dated 2016, it outlines the powers and duties of the planning commission. It gives a little clarity because legal terms is, not the layman's job. But point 2 on page 9 of the powers and duties, it specifically says the Planning Commission's powers and duties are to prepare and recommend to the City Council zoning ordinances and maps and amendments to zoning ordinances and maps which conform to the provisions of the general plan adopted by the City Council. The current motion originally started as a motion to zone as LDR as an interim before going ultimately to the MDR that we've already know is requested. That was later changed to R110, which only furthers a potential issue. That is why I, as well as Dave Malone, encourage the city to heavily consider going straight to MDR as per the state of Utah's guidelines. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment on this item? Looks like we have a couple of people that have already commented that want to comment again. Or is the council okay with letting them come back up? Okay, so I think you wanted to speak, and then you had another comment as well. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so we just want to address that. What originally was planned for the 0.16 acre, which is not true, the leverage. There is a piece of the property that we could use a slope agreement that would help where we're at with our current facility. But we had intended all along to pick up that 0.16 and do a daycare facility. But when we went through the planning, they said if you do over a certain amount of remodel, then we have to have it. Then basically you have to tear the buildings down. So it basically has to be incorporated with that, or it's going to stay that way, because the planning won't allow us to do improvements enough to be able to do what we originally intended to do. So when he comes up here and says, "Oh, it's just for leverage, they're going to charge us," that's not true at all. We would love to work with him or anybody else. I know there's been other interest in that property that has been willing to work with us and have walked the slope. We've met with David Malone, and he was not he was just very abrasive. We've met with other people that have said, oh yeah, it makes total sense, and then we can incorporate the whole thing, and we want it to look nice and to clean the area up too. But if that's not considered in the rezone of high density, then you'll have that piece there forever.
But I want to address one thing. In the last meeting, there was comments made by Mr. Malone that they had an option on the property that we had under contract for a long time. So his comments were erroneous. He never had an option on the Olson property at all. He never had it under contract. We, like Riley said, we had talked and been in talks with someone to do a daycare. And then when we heard that we would have to, that it would not be able to retrofit to what we wanted, then it was like we went ahead with it. It wasn't as represented by Mr. Malone. So that's kind of where we're at with that. But we had it under contract at the time of that meeting that we did not attend. We were not there in the meeting, and we're not aware of it.
Thank you.
And there is verification if you go back to the city planning board. We tried to work with city to do this daycare. So it's not a leverage thing. It never was intended for that.
Thank you. Okay, one last comment here, over here.
So just to state that our feasibility study that we did do by engineers, we have enough frontage there is no safety issues. That road can handle an MDR product there. Also, we have talked with Craig Pay, who is the south owner, and he has a parcel in the back. And we have talked with Craig Pay that not only are we going to help build the road that the city wants there in the back, but clean up that back parcel, and also that's our access to the sewer. So Craig Pay is actually, or the Pays, I'm sorry, are really excited about a multifamily product going in there. So thank you.
Mr. Connect.
So just a follow-up. The general plan calls for MDR, but it's specific, as in not just any MDR, but something built for batching singles.
We understand that.
Okay, all right. And are you interested in developing the whole parcel so that we don't have something just left out front? It sounds like the other party is willing.
We'd be more than happy to take it off their hands at the acquisition price, but no more. Our council agrees this 0.16 acre parcel should not be an issue for the rezoning of the Petra Fessa parcel. We assume Provo City's council would feel the same.
But if we do rezone both of them to the same thing, that would be helpful, I would think.
Sure, down the road, we can definitely incorporate that. We would be interested in, again, purchasing it for the acquisition price, maybe 5% more max, ultimately, and that would be a great open space that we can develop into something nice that would incorporate into the MDR zone.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the public? All right, I guess we'll let the owner get one more chance to speak.
I just want to say that I don't think legally you guys can handcuff us with that 0.16 acres. However, just like the Riley from the Sorensen spoke of, we also had a mutual agreement with the Olson family. Unfortunately, it was one of those things, was whoever got there first. I was in backup position on that property. I did exactly what you guys said. I got out there and I got the, I didn't respond the very next day. So if this would help mitigate all the issues that are being discussed about now, I can tell you I know what the purchase price is. I will not divulge it to anyone except for perhaps should it need to go to that extent, so that we can just make this work for everybody and not have it be a bone of contention.
Well, I believe it's a matter for the parties involved to
Right.
work out. That's not really an issue for us to.
And that's what I'm trying to point
Yeah.
out. That, it seems like they're two different partials, and I understand, what we're asking for, and it sounds like they're, wanting the same thing, so,
We hope you can all work that out.
okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public that wish to speak to this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring this back to the council for discussion.
I have a question.
Mr.
Just
Connect.
simply about process, and Brian's not here, but let's get somebody, there we go. Oh, yes, that's right, you have to stand. So whether it be Brian or community development, it's just a matter of this having gone through the Planning Commission, and they have recommended R110, and we have applicants asking for MDR on this particular piece of property, and the 477, and there's, I guess it's the .16, whatever, which probably should go the same zone, whatever zone we end up going. But can we legally call this out and do it separately as MDR while we're doing everything else R110?
So let me address a couple of points there. So one of the comments, I think the implied argument was that you can't even zone it R110 because the Planning Commission couldn't have recommended that to you. I disagree with that. I recognize that they might have been quoting out of the handbook, but the handbook is a summary, and it does not state the law. Utah Code 10-9A-302 says, regarding the powers of the Planning Commission, that the Planning Commission shall make a recommendation to the legislative body for land use regulations. That's their job, is to make recommendations regarding land use recommendations. So I don't see any reason why the Planning Commission cannot have made the recommendation that they did, nor why you couldn't have changed, even if they had recommended something else, why you couldn't have changed that recommendation. Because then the follow-up to that is that the state statute says that the municipal council, when receiving recommendations from the Planning Commission, can accept, reject, or modify those recommendations as they see fit. There is, I suppose, an argument that someone could make that if you changed, if the council heard a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and the ultimate action of the council was so different from anything that the Planning Commission had ever even considered, that someone could argue that the Planning Commission had not actually given you a recommendation on that issue. That could potentially be a problem. But in this particular case, you have actual discussion from the Planning Commission about zoning at MDR, so you know that they considered that. Their recommendation was to zone it all R110 to give you and the Planning Commission themselves future control about applications, but I don't see any reason why you can't modify that per state statute in accordance with things that the Planning Commission has in fact considered. The one question that I don't know the answer to that Bill or somebody from community development would probably have to weigh in on is whether we can even feasibly amend the ordinance tonight, because I don't know that we have legal descriptions of the individual pieces of property and exhibits that we could attach to make that change tonight.
In other words, to carve out something from the whole.
Right, because the ordinance that's in front of you is to zone the entire area R110 and contains legal description and an exhibit showing the entire area. So to change that, we'd have to have the appropriate legal descriptions and exhibits to carve out the pieces that you want to do differently, and would have to confer with community development whether that's something that could happen tonight or not.
Okay.
Any other questions on the front?
Mr. Harding?
Two things. I wanted to first talk to the council and mention I was a little uncomfortable with some of the public comment that was made, and statements of, well, this party's doing this and this party's doing that, but I think we invited that, whatever that was, 6 weeks ago, when I think we as a council got too deep into the details, particularly when we started making suggestions that people work out deals and all that. I think that was, very interesting, but I think that was too far down from where we should be. I think we need to be concentrating on the high level policy, and then let the parties do what they're going to do. So just for future reference, and then to the community that's here that have made some comments and requests for the MDR. I want to explain my understanding and try to make it as clear as possible, and hopefully you can understand at least how I see it. We have up on the board the neighborhood master plan, or neighborhood area plan, which is an appendix to the general plan. And this was most recently, this has been in the works for many years, and was very recently approved by the council. So this is really the vision for this area, future land use map, and this area that we're looking at is shown as MDR. So just to be clear, I think everyone in the community agrees that this will be developed as MDR. That's the intent. And I think you're going to find the council and the planning, community development, everyone is going to be very willing to work with you to get good projects in here that meet that MDR. So that is the intent. Now, what we're considering is rezoning it currently as R110. And now that you may say, well, that's silly. Why do it at R110 if it's MDR? The purpose is as an interim, just as a placeholder, as something that is restrictive enough that nobody would come in here and say, oh, well, I'm willing to build something at an R110 in this area, because it doesn't make sense, because the area is much more valuable for that as an MDR property. I think we all recognize that, well, I think we would all hope that any property owners that are selling it for development would not be getting R110 values. I think the understanding is that the sale price for the land should be in the MDR values, because that is what is going to be built. I think we understand that it does make it a little more difficult. A developer may say, well, I don't have that guarantee, and therefore I'm not willing to pay the top dollar for it. I think we see that argument, but I think the value, the reason that we're not moving directly to MDR is so that projects in the future will need to go to the Planning Commission and will need to come to the council for our approval. And I feel that we feel that that's important, as we heard from the neighborhood chair, that we make sure that the projects are going to be beneficial for the entire area. And so we heard someone earlier saying, hey, you've got a willing buyer, you've got a willing developer, we're ready to go. And to that, I would respond, okay, great, show us the project. I hope that we move forward with this tonight, that we'll rezone it R110. But if at the earliest meeting that we get a project in here that's a good MDR project, I think we would all be excited to look at it and move forward with it. So just because we're contemplating rezoning at R110 should not be taken as a signal that we're not serious about moving forward with MDR projects. So as soon as you have those ready, let's see them. Let's do it.
Mr. Winterton?
I just have a question. Why would we not consider LDR? If we know it's not going to be R110, we're quite certain of that, why can't we at least go to the next step, what's going to give it some density, going to LDR like they suggest? What's the reason for not going to that point?
That was the discussion at the Planning Commission level, where staff and the neighborhood came in saying, yeah, LDR, and said this will give us some discretion on the final outcome. And the Planning Commission made the observation that, you know, someone could buy it at LDR and build it to LDR and never have to come back for any approval and just go with that zone, and then no one would have any final approval or discretion because you'd already given enough value away or you know, the zoning away that it didn't have to come back. They just maybe forego going MDR. So the R110 in the eyes of the Planning Commission was the guaranteed way to make sure, one, it would be residential and not M1. They felt strongly about that, but also that it would come back through the process and be reviewed to make sure that it was in compliance with the vision of the general plan, which in this case is rather unique. We don't have an MDR or an LDR batching single zone that's going to call out the new type of housing for this millennial group. And so if you just give them an LDR, you will not get a product for the millennials. You'll get just plain vanilla LDR or MDR. The only way you're going to get something designed for batching singles is if it comes back through the process.
Well, and maybe Mr. Harding tells me we probably don't want LDR. I'm not adverse to LDR, I guess, at this point. I just looking for density, but I recognize R110 is a holding pattern. There's no question about that. And how much do we want to actually get our hands into the design of that? And hopefully the planners will come up with the good designs and the builders.
Right now, we don't have a zone. We didn't create a zone for batching singles that calls out the amenities and everything. It's just kind of a theoretical concept. And so when somebody brings a project forward, staff will review it and we'll review it and we'll see if it meets the needs of this demographic that we're trying to build some housing for. Otherwise, I think they could just come back and just build regular housing that doesn't, it's just family housing. And
are we saying we have to have that type of housing, or what if the building?
That's what the general plan calls for. The whole area is MDR with a batching singles overlay, but what that's going to look like is yet to be determined. At least I am not familiar with any specific things on the books that would define it. Brian?
Well, I was just going to answer the question this way, which is that think about our general plan and its application throughout the city. There are areas already in the city that are on the general plan shown LDR, but at least since I've been working with the council would never consider just going ahead and rezoning them to LDR just because they were on the general plan as LDR. Because that's never been the council's policy of how they handle land use applications. So I think the real question is, why are you even rezoning this property at all? And as Mr. Harding has pointed out, the reason to rezone it is because you don't want M1. So it's not really a question of what kind of, at this point, the proposal that's in front of the council is not really about what you do want, it's about what you don't want.
And if I could just make a comment too, a number of the single professionals that I've talked to actually like being in a little bit of a mixed environment where they have a lot of their peers, but there's some families and a mixture there. So I hope our goal isn't to target this too narrowly, but I mean, we definitely want to have a healthy dose of housing that will attract single professionals and probably grad students as well. But But I hope we keep some flexibility for the developer there to include a mixture of housing types as well.
You mean we could live there?
We could.
And one of the key obvious elements when you're providing housing for, let's say, 4 instead of our usual 3, if it was just by our usual definitions, it would only be 3 singles per unit. But by allowing a new product for batching singles, the general plan calls for up to 6, but in reality, the market calls for 3 and 4, so you would probably see nothing more than 4 singles per each unit, whether that's 4 bedrooms or whether they want to share bedrooms. But typically they don't want to share bedrooms, and they do want a parking spot. So this type of housing requires extra parking, just like you were doing student housing close to campus. But this demographic doesn't want to live close to campus, doesn't want to live in that kind of environment. They like what they've got in Southeast Provo generally, except it is woefully short on parking because it was designed as family housing, and we want to design something for them.
Another comment, as far as the number of singles per unit, that will vary as well according to the demographic. If it's students, there's economic pressure and they'll tolerate more per unit because of the economic advantage, but most of the single professionals don't want to have more than 3 or 4 per unit. Right? Yeah. Santiago?
One thing that I think that they've shown that they're interested in is also in being able to purchase, to own something. And I think some of them own units, and then they have roommates, and they help pay for their for the unit. So I think that's something that probably needs to be considered. But I thought that Mr. Harding did a good job of outlining why our 110 zone, why it's important to have that, and why not an LDR zone. I think maybe Mr. Pepperoni could help us understand the difference between an LDR zone and an MDR. I believe MDR has more specification, and it has, if we were just to zone it LDR, and as Mr. Connect said, we could get something undesirable. And we're really looking for something special here. We're not looking for just a typical housing development. We're looking for something very specific, so.
Yes, so the LDR zone limits you to side-by-side or row townhomes. That's the most intense type of housing product you can build, and limits you at 15 units to the acre, where the MDR zone allows you to stack units and go to the 30 units to the acre. The Planning Commission was afraid that somebody would underutilize the property if it was zoned LDR now, and they'd just go ahead with an LDR product, and we'd miss an opportunity to get something higher density and something more different like you're describing. We've had many developers calling and asking about this area and this MDR zone and what they can expect to get. And what the Planning Division has repeatedly told them is, if they come in with a product that looks like stacked apartments that you would build south of BYU campus for BYU students, that's not likely to get approved by the City Council. What the City Council is looking for is a housing product type that would be appealing to the millennials who are illegally occupying in this area and get them to move over to this MDR zone. That's the value of having this level of scrutiny that still needs to take place, because that product type is being developed and defined right now. We don't have a zone on the books, as you've said. So this extra layer of scrutiny is actually, I think, very important.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I sure hope the developers of these different parcels in this area will do a really good survey to see what kinds of features would attract this demographic, what they're looking for. Are there any other comments on this item? Then we have an implied motion to pass an ordinance amending the zone map classification to R110 Unless there's a motion to change that, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. All those in favor of passing the implied motion? The motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. Thank you. Now move on to item number 11, which is an ordinance amending Provo City Code, Section 142160, to increase the size of signs permitted in the Regional Shopping Center at SC3 zone. And this will be presented by Aaron Ardmore.
Thank you. If you recall from the study meeting we had, this is the next phase of redeveloping the Provo Town Center Mall area. If we can go to the slides, we can show you the signs that we're talking about. There's a specific section of code written into the SC3 zone for these two signs along University Avenue by the mall. If we can get those up. Keep going, one more. So, okay, that'll work. So there's that one there on the left. They're about maybe 20 feet tall right now. There's the one there, and then at the next slide up, there's another one that matches that. So there's code written in the zone for these signs to be able to be built in the right of way. It's very specific to the mall. And now that the mall is redeveloping, rebranding, they have proposed these new Provo Town Center signs that you see on the right. But to be able to do that, they need to increase the maximum allowances for square footage and height. As you can see, they're bigger, more fitting with signs around them today and what malls are doing today. So staff has reviewed this language that's been proposed by the applicant. If we can go back to the language on that first page. In section A, subsection A, to add advertising as an allowable type of sign copy. And then in D and E is increasing the allowable square footage and height for the signs that the mall has proposed. Staff has reviewed this, Planning Commission has reviewed this and recommended approval. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer those.
All right, thank you. This item is open for public comment. Are there any members of the public that have come to comment? And, oh, I forgot to ask, are there any neighborhood chairs in this area that care to comment as well? If there are no members of the public that wish to comment, then we'll close public comment and bring this back to the council for discussion. Were you intending? No, okay. All right.
Trying to remember, do we have, who is our neighborhood chair of the East Bay neighborhood? Is it a, was that?
It's Dion Wilson? Dion Wilson.
Okay. For East Bay, okay. Because I thought there were no residences in East Bay. Okay. Yeah. All right, cool. So I appreciated a tour that I was given of this area, and something clicked for me during that tour that I hadn't seen before, I was confused about before. Previously, currently there are these two 20-foot signs. Previously, there was a large sign in between the two that had Provo Town Center. And I guess the idea is someone driving up or down University, they would see this big sign. And then here's the two smaller signs that mark the access roads to get back to the mall. And they are quite unusual because they are in the right-of-way. I can't think of another sign that was in a public right-of-way for a commercial area. And so I think when this was originally done, I think that was a pretty smart way to do it based on how this was pushed back and had the two access roads, one big sign in the middle and then two little signs to mark where they're going. That large sign was taken down as part of the building of the new hotel. And so that's down, and I believe the plan is to not put up the sign, that middle sign again. And so now the idea is take these two small, almost markers for the right-of-way, the streets to get back there, markers for the access roads that are in the right-of-way, and turn these now into a more typical sign for the business. So that at least made more sense to me now, and kind of was helpful when I got that from the tour. I'm not sure where the rest of the council is on this. I am a little uneasy with it being in the right-of-way for the size that is being asked for. I am wary about the electronic signs and churn and all of that, but I just hope we don't. I mean, it seems like often we're dealing with things where we have ordinances in place, but then we're dealing with things that are grandfathered in, and we're kind of kicking ourselves. Oh, it's too bad we didn't have, what we have now, the ordinances that we have now, and back then, because now we're dealing with these non-conforming signs and things. And I just hope we don't get down the road a ways with this and look back and say, oh boy, I wish we had nipped this in the bud, or I wish we hadn't gone down this road of allowing more and more electric signs, motion, churn, and all of that. Anyway, so those are my thoughts, and I'm still not quite sure where I'm going to vote on this, but those are my thoughts.
And Mr. Harding, your comments reminded me that I forgot to invite the applicant to see if he had anything he would like to say.
Thank you, Chair Sewell, for the opportunity to come up. Thank you, Councilmember Harding. I enjoyed our conversation as well. I thought we had a lot of good questions back and forth about some of the issues. And I'll be the first to say I agree with Councilmember Harding. When we talk about this type of signage, and we talked about the one in Orem with the jumping goats on it, that really serves no purpose. I think this council really needs to look at signs with purpose, signs that are smart, signs that are projecting messages that relate to a specific need. I would be the first to say I would much rather that this go on a nice Maverick corner, but I don't think Brixton Capital is in market to buy a gas station right now. So for us, we take the redevelopment as it comes, and then if opportunities happen, we'll take the best opportunity given to us at that time. And for us, redevelopment signage is always one of the very first things you do, because you need to project a message to people that things are happening. You have to project confidence and change to your retailers, who we have to deal with them each separately. Over 90 people we deal with separately and have to listen to all their concerns. And I can tell this body that signage and how we project the image of Provo Town Center right now, and also moving forward into this redevelopment, is their top concern. How is their name attached to our name, either helping them or hindering them? So I thank you for the opportunity to come and bring this item to your attention, and I'll be back if you have any more questions for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bolson. Mr. Winterton.
It looks to me like both of these are signalized intersections right now, aren't they? As far as safety and looking around the signs, we're looking at the streetlights rather than necessarily looking to them for guidance, rather than having to be blocked and looking around a sign. Aren't they both signalized? Okay.
And Mr. Jones, I know we talked a little bit about electronic signs, but it might be helpful to kind of remind us what would be allowed there in terms of an electronic sign, in terms of churn and all that.
Sure. So this area, properties having frontage on University Avenue are already included in the area where electronic display signs are allowed. And the current brightness standards and the 8-second static hold requirements that are in that ordinance would apply to any signs in that area.
Thank you. Is there any other council discussion on the motion? Well, I guess I'll throw in a comment then. I really appreciate Brixton Capital for being willing to pour $80 million into renovation of the new mall, and I appreciate our energetic new management there at the mall, and so I'm in favor of this and hope that it would be helpful in their efforts. Any other comments or questions, or Mayor? Okay. Ms. Santiago.
I've said this before, but I believe that helping with signage, helping bring in those that would patronize the mall, really does help all of the citizens in Provo, especially those taxpayer citizens, because as we can increase our sales tax revenues, we can hold other taxes down. So it really does benefit everyone to have people come and do their shopping at the Provo Town Center Mall and in other areas of our city. So I appreciate too the efforts to revitalize that mall and make it a place where people want to come and patronize. Thank you.
If there's no further comments, I'll call for a vote on the implied motion to pass the ordinance amendment as displayed on the screen tonight. All in favor? The motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren excused. Thank you. Now move on to item number 12, which is an ordinance amending Provo City Code to eliminate the facade step back for buildings in the general downtown DT1 zone. This item is to be presented by Dustin Wright.
Thank you. So if we can go to the first slide. This item for the step back is being requested by the applicant specifically for a project that is being proposed on Center Street between 100 East and 200 East. The applicant's request is to take the 20-foot step back that's required currently for the floors above the third story, and to eliminate that. The Planning Commission heard this item and made a recommendation on the next slide here that would be the same, except to keep a 1-foot step back to help maintain an architectural expression line across the front of the building there. And so that recommendation would help the applicant to be able to provide more leasable space, which is a goal of the city to help the downtown zone have more residential units. And so that request would help in that aspect as well. To orient you, if we can go to the next slide. There we go. So the property is outlined over here, just off of Center Street, proposed to go in on this section here. The historic Provo district, historic downtown Provo, goes from 3rd West to 100 East. So it ends the block before this block that's being proposed for the step back change. And so, yeah, if there are any questions on that, I'll be happy to answer those.
Mr. Connect.
So here we have an aerial view of the property's location. Do we happen to have any kind of Google Street View showing the massing of what this will look like?
Yeah. So here's the existing site here, and then here's across to the west on the north side Center Street. And here's the proposed project. The street here is Center Street, and then this is 100 East here on the left. So the step back currently would eliminate the upper portion here, approximately back to here, to be able to meet the current step back requirements. So the request is to bring that from 20 feet down to 1 foot to help enclose that space there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak?
Hi, I'm McKay Christensen, and I represent 105 Partners, who is the developer on this. And I know that I've we've probably gone through this a little bit, but I have a couple things that I just wanted to talk about in review. Do you have that file that you can throw up? It's the one on the step back. And does this work? So some of the things that I just wanted to point out, and we've kind of tweaked the elevation just a little bit, but and I know that we probably have reviewed some of this before, so I'll go through it pretty quick. And if you have any questions, please just interrupt me. And it may be better to just start with your questions, but we'll go this way. So that's the project site, as Dustin pointed out. And our rationale behind the text amendment to get rid of the step back is really that this section between 100 East and 200 East, it's outside of the historical district and yet is still in that downtown zone. But it really is different from the rest of Center Street, apart from not being a part of the historical Center Street. And I won't go through all of this. I can just go through the slides, but we've gone through this before. Basically, the distance between, from the buildings that are set back off of this part of Center Street, as you can see, it's about 100, some of the buildings are about 150 feet set back off of Center Street, whereas the rest of Center Street, you're at about 30 to 35. Also, the distance between buildings along this section of road is about 130 feet, whereas the distance between Red Sky and the county offices is almost 250 feet. And so you're talking about the difference of 120 feet or so. Also, just to get an idea of the sense of scale, University Avenue is actually the same width as Center Street. It's about 130 to 135 feet wide. And you can see Wells Fargo is 7 stories. The Zions building is over 9 stories. And so that can kind of give you a sense of scale and in terms of the width of the street and what it may look like. I think that the prevailing idea was that they wanted to avoid this sort of narrow corridor. And so, they incorporated the step back, which I don't think that you have this problem on our side of the street where you're 150 feet 250 feet off of Center Street. Then the other part is the architecture. Of course, there really isn't any historic architecture along this section. You've got the county offices that are across the street. And then the history of the site is this. So we don't have any historic architecture that we're trying to preserve. It basically is an urban infill redevelopment project. It's been an auto mechanics garage and dilapidated little office buildings for years. And so there's no history that we're preserving, no historic architecture, even though we're trying to design the building in such a way where it looks like there was an old historic building. Probably the biggest reason why why we need to eliminate the setback is because of efficiency. You can see that if this is basically this is the basic floor plan of our building. If we were to have a 20-foot step back, it cuts all of those units that face Center Street basically in half. And so all of those units that are on Center Street right there on the far right side of that page, they go up 3 stories. And so, in effect, these are what those units look like. If we were to cut that in half, right now they're 755 square feet, If I were to cut it in half, I'd end up with a 387 square foot unit with a 352 square foot balcony. And it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, your balcony is bigger than, as big as your unit is. And it also fights the other issue that we're dealing with, which is the average, minimum average unit size of the units. The more inefficient the building becomes, the more difficult it is to meet that requirement. And so basically the net effect is I would lose all of those units going on floors 4, 5, and 6, which is 7 units times 3, it's about 21 units. If we redesigned it, it may be about 15 or so. And again, the balconies are too big. It's not functional space. It just ends up becoming a waste of space. One of the things that we could do, again, if you were to look at this unit, again, it's 755 square feet. Right now, after level 3, we're stepping it back 2 feet after that one tower element on our building. And so we do have some facade step back, but if I were to take even any more out of that unit, you can see it becomes really challenging. Like, where do I take it? Do I take it out of the entry room? Do I take it out of the bedroom? Or do I take it out of the living room? And so one of the things that we're kind of proposing I would prefer to not have any step back at all, except for the 1 foot on the corner and then 2 feet as you get around the corner. But if we had to, I could probably compromise about 5 feet. The challenge is, again, as I go back to this unit here, I'm just laying all my cards on the table, but if I go back to this unit here, I've already got 2 feet, so if I took out an additional 3, where are those coming from? I end up with, a less functional entry, a less functional bedroom, or a less functional living room. Does that make sense on those units that face that way? So, but if in an effort to try to compromise in some way, 5 feet is about the max that we think that we could do.
Are there any questions? Thank you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you for your calm and factual presentation that always does well for us to be able to relate to what you're trying to present. So I appreciate your persistence and working with staff, and we'll see how this goes.
All right, this item is open for public comment. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the council for discussion. Mr. Stewart.
One of the questions I get from constituents that I can't answer, like on 9th East, why there's no setback. Why is the city allowing building after building to go with no setback? To accommodate the developer or to make it a better looking city? And I haven't been able to answer it. I promised some people that I would look very carefully, and I would probably be not voting for buildings without some setback.
I would clarify, George, that the setback that we're talking here is not the distance from the street. I believe you're going to be how far from Center Street for the facade?
We set back off Center Street with the parking and everything else. I don't know. The building itself is at least 10 feet. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're talking about the building itself, how far it sits back off of Center Street. It's at least 10 feet. We've got a 10-foot sidewalk, I think, and then you've got the parking in front of that.
And some trees.
Right.
Yeah, we're talking about people driving down 9th East and seeing something that goes right up to the sidewalk, no trees, no parking, is just, the one.
Yeah, and I know which one you're talking about. I don't have it in my mind and know what that streetscape looks like, but yes, here we'll have opportunities for trees that will line the street. We'll have a generous sidewalk. All of the retail, we want this to be inviting. All of the retail doors that are along Center Street there, we want to make them like garage doors that open up, and so it's whether it's a restaurant or something like that flows in and out, and And yes, it'll have a very charming streetscape to it.
Just for clarity, I think the words are a little confusing, but there's a setback, which generally talks about the footprint being away from the street or the property line. And then we have a step back, which occurs higher up on the multiple floors. So we're looking at this step back, not a setback.
What is the setback then on these apartments, 10 feet?
Setback, yeah.
I think it would be fair to say that it would be similar to anything else downtown. We're not coming closer necessarily than other setbacks.
Yeah, so the setback in the downtown zone for this project will mimic that across the street that's already existing. So the building will come up to the sidewalk. You'll have a large sidewalk, an amenity space for dining tables or things like that. Then you'll have your parking. So that is already existing in the code, the setback.
No, on 9th East, you have sidewalk, but you don't have parking. Looks closer. Right.
And
I'm talking about on 9th East.
and then on 9th,
Would you like us to pull that up? Show the difference.
9th East?
and then on 9th East,
The parking makes a difference, no question.
Yeah, it's a smaller sidewalk too, isn't it?
yeah,
And a park strip.
Park Strip. Also, 9th East is a much faster.
Step back.
No, I understand. I understand what you're saying.
The 9th East is a much faster road. The traffic's going a lot faster, so you need a further sight line to be able to know when it's safe to pull out. I think on the more urban roads, the traffic is going slower, and so having smaller setbacks makes more sense in downtown cores.
Possibly.
So I can see Mr. Stewart's concerns, and I have some concerns too. What I really like about Mr. Christensen's project is that the parking is inside and the units wrap around on the outside. Whereas this, on 9th East, the parking is the first two levels, and there's no mix, there's no commercial on the bottom. It's parking, right? I guess we're comparing now, and I don't know if that's wise or not. But to compare what I see here and what I see with what Mr. Christensen wants to do, it's very different in that on the ground level you have commercial, you have restaurant space, you have vibrant space on the bottom, in a place where we have other vibrant restaurants and things, and it really, that would really flow with what we have on Center Street. The step back, being 20 feet back, makes sense to me to maintain that architectural look, and even the house next to it is about that, 3-story level. However, I think because there's enough architectural interest in what he's presenting here, it doesn't feel like, oh, there's this big block of building in your face, And so my concern would be if this isn't what gets built, but there are the same allowances, could we get a building like we have on 9th East, where the first two levels are just parking that are sort of covered up with, cement, and then, buildings on top of that, or housing on top of it. And what are the possibilities? What's the worst case scenario if we make these allowances and Mr. Christensen sells the property, or something happens and this doesn't get built? What's the worst case scenario we could see on this corner by making this allowance and then the one that's, coming next?
And may I add, just if you can answer my question too at the same time, if we do this for him, shouldn't we be able to do it for others? That's, once you set that precedent, that was my second concern I didn't have a chance to express. I was concerned that if we do this, where does that lead in the future?
Okay, first I'd like to just agree with you on your observations about the building at 9th East and 7th North. That's still a very suburban environment, and we allowed a building with a very urban setback to go in. So we're working on amendments to that zone right now with the Planning Commission to bring to you to keep that from happening again in the campus mixed-use zone. The design guidelines for the campus mixed-use zone and downtown zone are very different in that the downtown zone requires you to have occupiable space at street level. So that commercial frontage and the frontage as it wraps around the corner down First East, it's required to be occupied space, whether it's commercial or residential. You've got some leeway there, but it's got to be occupied space. That building on 9th and 7th, that requirement isn't in that zone. So they put parking structure out there where I think that was a mistake. It should relate to the street better than that does, better than a parking structure does. Those are the types of amendments we'll be bringing forward to you. I don't think I answered your question, George. Would you ask me?
If you do this for this developer, what about future developers in the downtown area? Are you comfortable with doing this other places?
I'm comfortable doing it on this block until we can have more analysis of this issue. If you look at down the block just to the other direction, did we get a Google Earth picture of that? Can we pull that up? Okay, so this is just the other block, the other side of the block. That's First East, right there where the stop sign is, right? We're just looking west now instead of looking to the east. That building right there is 63 East. That's the 20-foot step back that was required on 63 East. That's the night block, the most iconic building in our city, right, on the same block. So that step back very much fit this context. I think that was the right thing to do, given the buildings on this block. Those buildings don't exist on the next
block. The old
block.
library on the corner there, what would you require there? Because it's going to be across the street from this new development.
Right, the library is only 1.5 stories.
Well, it's going to be redeveloped. Someday.
Someday it could redevelop. It's a historic building, so I think they'd have a hard time doing that. But if it did, then I would think that this same 20-foot step back should apply to keep that history of this block. Once you cross that street, which is why the historic district ends at this street, that changes. And I agree with Mr. Christensen. When you look at the county buildings, the state buildings across the street, you look at the different context, I think what he's asking for is warranted. I know you didn't ask me this question, but I'm going to throw out my opinion. I think it would be a mistake to take that usable space out of his units for sake of the step back. I would rather see a 1 to 2 foot step back than to take that usable space out of the units, because those units are, to me, very well designed and very functional as they are. If you take out, every foot you take out, that unit just becomes less functional. Now, this was the first time I've seen that information. We hadn't seen that before tonight, but that surprised me at the impact it would have on the functionality of those units. And I'm afraid we'd look back on that and think it was a mistake.
You answered my question, thank you.
Mr. Hardy, can I ask, on the street view that we've got, can we just swing around, 90 degrees and look at the other corner? Yes, that right there. I guess, is it all right if I make some comments?
Yes.
No, thank you. So I'm looking at this, and I here are the different arguments, and the way that I'm looking at this is, we have a project that's before us. I think this is a good project. I think it moves us forward in many of the things that we're trying to accomplish downtown. I think it's good. I really like this project. Of course, any of the more difficult questions before the council, it's never like, well, there's the right answer and the wrong answer. To me, there's always competing interests. There's, we've got certain things we're trying to do, and then other things we're trying to do, and it's just trying to balance it. I think looking at it from a project perspective, yes, it's a good project. Does this need to happen in order to have the project go forward? Does this request need to be granted in order for the project to move forward? It's possible that it needs to do that. But I also feel like I need to look at it not from what do we need to do in order to make this project happen, but what do we need to do for the broader sense to build, to achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve and to build the community that we're trying to build, and not look at it just through one project's perspective. I think another thing that we're looking for is to protect and enhance the feel of our center street. I think University is a great street, but I think other towns, other cities have streets like our university have. There's a very few that have what we have on Center Street. I think that's a very special thing, and I think we need to both protect what we have there, and many of them are historic buildings and will be protected that way, but also enhance. We can look across the street, and across the street to the south, and there's the county buildings, and no, that doesn't fit with the Center Street feel of that section. But there are other places along that stretch where there's holes. There's buildings that are out of place compared to what other things that are around there. But just because we have those holes, I don't think that necessarily means that we can't try to enhance what we have. And it doesn't destroy it. I think it'd be nice if they weren't there and we had more compatible buildings there. But we have what we have, and we can, instead of just throwing it out because there's some holes, we can continue to build. So for me, yeah, the county building is kind of a hole there, and it's different. But you've got this historic Carnegie Library on one corner and on one side of the proposed project, and on the other you've got this beautiful Harmon building, 3-story there, and then beyond that you have the mortuary, and it's already kind of tapering down into what we have further on to the east. But we've got this property here, and is there a historic building there? No, there isn't. I mean, it's obviously, what we have there is not historic. It's not helpful, and I think that's one of the great things about this project is those things will be removed, and we'll get something that's much better there. But if we put in a building, if the building that goes in there, ties between the Harmon building and the library, I think just helps extend the feel of Center Street a little bit further. And my understanding is that's why we had this design corridor. That's what we were trying to do. That's why we have these things there. We started at a 60-foot step back. It's then moved to 25 and then to 20, and I was there for some of those conversations, and we had all sorts of analyses that, well, if you're standing on the sidewalk and you're looking here, the angle here, at 20 feet, and it was kind of this analysis on how that would feel, and I feel like that's been missing from this conversation is, there was a very specific reason why we had those step backs, and now it feels like there hasn't been a good explanation on why we feel that either they're not helpful or how we can achieve the same thing some other way. I haven't been convinced. I was convinced on the others, and I haven't hit that convincing point yet. And so for me, this is competing interests and trying to balance. Do we make this accommodation and allow it to move forward as designed, or do we say no, whether it's this project or maybe something that comes after it, do we hold to these design standards and try to, is that the more important thing? And again, I'm not sure where I'm going to vote on this one. I almost kind of hope I'm not a swing vote, because I don't know if I want that responsibility, but or that pressure. But can we go to the I don't think it's the elevation view, but it's kind of like the elevation view. One of those pictures that we had showing the front. Is that called an elevation, or is that only if it's like orthogonal? Rendering. If we can get a rendering. Yes, that one. So I think the Harmon building there is also rendered. I don't think that's not the actual Harmon building there, but you can kind of see how the Harmon building would be dwarfed by what's shown there. as compared to 63 East, which because of that 20-foot step back fit with the rest of the buildings there. And then can we look at the floor design? I think it's like the 4th floor. And showing the line through it, what would happen to those? Thank you for driving. I appreciate you jumping around for me. So I don't want to play architect because it'll be really, really bad. But it's one of those things that I think we just have to make good policy decisions and then let others figure out how to make it work. Now we've got here, these seven units that are cut in half, and obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't make, could be problematic. But you can imagine if you, I almost need a laser pointer, but is there a laser pointer I can use? Thank you. Okay, you can imagine if this one was removed and say that one was removed, and then all of this was shifted back 20 feet. So now you're losing 2 units. Now, that would also reduce some space here. And again, I don't want to play architect. That's probably an oversimplification. But the idea is there may be ways to make that step back work without losing as many units or without losing the functionality of that many units. Is it going to be 6? Is it going to be, I don't want to, but the point is it might make, we can set the standards and then let the developers, let the architects figure out a way to make it work. Or we can, anyway, if it's that important to us, if we feel like these design standards are necessary to help us to build the downtown that we need.
Mr. Stewart, this is time for a council discussion at this point. Thank you. Mr. Stewart.
Well, David expressed some of my feelings. Anytime we've made accommodations to our standards for specific developments, often we've been sorry in the long run. Startup, no question. We wish we would have done that differently now when we saw the results. So I agree with David. When you have standards, it's nice to meet those standards instead of letting the developer say, I can't meet those standards to make my development pencil, so change the standards. I don't like that.
Mr. Connect.
Can we go back and see the illustration of the 20-foot setback? There was one that showed a different rendering what the building would look like from the street view. The other file, yeah. Right there, yeah. Is that more of what you were talking about, Dave? With the 20-foot setback, what it would look like?
Yes, I think that, and again, I like the red material on the other rendering. That looks more like the brick or whatever. But yeah, I think that would if you're standing, and this is across the street, but particularly if you're on the sidewalk on the north side, I think that helps tie in with everything that's to the west of that corner, and then also the Harmon building to the east.
Mr. Stewart.
It does give a different perspective to the Harmon Building, and it's interesting when you show those two pictures.
Yeah. Mr. Harding.
Again, I want to express again how much in favor I am for the project, and you know, I really hope that there's a way that that it can work, and if it really can't work, other than having this proposal be approved, I really am going to be torn on which way I'm going to vote. I threw out some things, and it kind of had some even implied questions there. I would be interested in hearing Mr. Christensen's response. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to hear his response.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Thanks, Dave. So, in answer to your question regarding the architecture, we've run this model and it doesn't work. This is where we began, and this is why I'm now applying for a reduction in the step back or eliminating the step back, because I just lose too many units that way. And keep in mind, it's more than 2 units per floor, and it's every floor multiplied by every floor. And so we got here, we tinkered with it, we played with it, we did everything that we could to try to make it work with my architect. Trust me, I've been through so many different iterations on this, it's driving me bonkers. But I couldn't make it work with that. And you can see off of that image that I showed you where I cut those units in half, in effect, you take out, basically it's a 20-foot step back across 130 feet multiplied by 3 floors. I'm looking at over 7,000 square feet of building that I'm just eliminating. And so there's no matter, and then what you don't see, what we get in with our architect is I've got corridors and stairwells and fire and elevators that now I have to start moving around, and everything just starts becoming less efficient. And so I actually lose more than just the 7,000 square feet of building, if that makes sense. It just, pushing everything back makes everything less efficient, and it doesn't operate in the same way. And so that's why when we look at this, we say, we're not asking to make a blatant judgment on all of Center Street. It was clear that Center Street has a certain scale that was I was there for those early discussions. I was a part of those. And when I worked with Paul Glauser and everybody else on that, and it was all about, look, we've got a historical Center Street scale that we're trying to maintain. And that's why what I'm trying to point out here is this is different. It completely stands outside of the rest of Center Street, outside of the historical district. It's outside of the historical scale of everything that was trying to be maintained. So when you talk about that step back and trying to maintain it, which honestly I don't agree with in the first place, I don't think it really accomplishes what the city, maybe it does. I mean, that's up to you. But I think all those little blank spots that you got going along, the push and pull that you're going to have, I think going forward for the rest of time is going to be, how do we make this feel like it's 100 years old, Center Street, without making it feel like it's 100 years old, right? Like, how do we redevelop this place and make it vibrant without making it feel stuck in time? And in order to do that, you're going to have to figure out ways to deal with the history of the site while also accounting for the developability of each one of these parcels, because you got little tiny pieces that are stuck in there all along the way. Some are historic, some are not. And in order to see those redeveloped, you're going to want to maintain the history and the feel, but it's also got to work economically or nothing's going to happen. It's just going to sit there for decades. And so that's my feeling on Center Street in total. But here, I feel like it would be easy for the council members to say, look, we can eliminate the step back because it's outside of historical Center Street. We can kick that one down the road later because it's got that historic scale, all that historic architecture. This piece stands outside of it because we don't have any history. We don't have historic architecture. We've got that building across the street sits 150 feet, 250 or 150 feet back. And so you don't have to worry about maintaining. You don't have to worry about setting some precedent for other parts of Center Street. So I don't know if that answers your questions, Dave.
Thank you.
Mr. Koenig? Could we go to the slide that shows the ordinance? Okay, so Fifth West is the western boundary I guess the point I just wanted to bring up is that there's a boundary on the west, there's a boundary on the east. And once you get past that, then it can and will develop in whatever fashion is the most economical. So this is a creative way to move the line and make his project possible. So we just have to decide. It's a tough call. I mean, I know it changes the look, but what the one that shows 20-foot setback with the yellow color and the gray, not appealing. But the current product with the well, it's not quite red, but it's a different color on the three floors on Center Street. That change of color, it's a good color, and then you have a different color above that, and it comes back a couple of feet. So it almost kind of amplifies even though there's not a lot of setback, it makes it look better than that other rendition.
Yes, and to your point, and to Ms. Santiago's, we will, that's something that I think Planning Commission does require, correct me if I'm wrong, Dustin, but we have to articulate that step back and keep a cornice on level 3. I think the building looks more beautiful that way too. I think the step back makes the building look funky, apart from just the materials themselves. But we can do all of those things in order to, because I understand your concern. I'm not misrepresenting something here, that trying to get something approved, and whether we sell it or something like that, something else gets developed. My understanding is from materials that are required, cornice, all of the design standards that are currently in the code will require that we design it to a certain standard that includes those architectural elements that creates that break in the elevation.
What size of setback have you got in that picture now?
So that one I think is our 2-foot, that's our 2-foot step back. And so if we did go to the 5, which again, I agree with Bill, I don't want to, because every square foot is precious in those units. And it's going to carry right over into the average unit size, right? Like trying to maintain a quality unit size. But on my the other rendering that I gave you, I think does articulate, that one may articulate a 5-foot step back. I don't know if it does or not. It's the very first image, yeah, the very first slide. And it's a little bit different, but you can see, yes, it does. It sits back a little bit more. Now we've kept the corner proud. The corner only steps back a foot because I think that in order to make look, this is going to bookend, in my opinion, this is your anchor tenant on Center Street. We're adding 10,000 square feet of retail to Center Street, which I don't know that I see anybody adding 10,000 square feet of retail on Center Street anywhere. And so this is almost acting like an anchor tenant. And I think in order to do that, we want to make that corner proud. And then, as we come around the edge, if we do want to step it back, I would do it after that sort of tower element on the corner. That's my thought, but that's articulated there. You can see on the far right edge, it's just not a great angle, but it cuts in a little bit, and you can see that it steps back about 5 feet. Can you see that on the rendering?
Ms. Santiago?
I'd just like to clarify, too, I wasn't saying that you had misrepresented or that this was something, but I do know that what we see in the picture, isn't always what ends up being built, and not always the same developer. I mean, these things change hands. For whatever reason, they do change hands at times. And so from my perspective, I want to be prepared and happy with the worst-case scenario. And that's what I'm thinking of is, what if this did change hands? What's the worst case scenario? And I think that going from 1.5 stories to 6 stories to 3 stories is a big jump if there's no architectural detail, if it's just a box and it's just yes, we stepped back a foot or two and then went straight up, and if it's just a box, and doesn't have the detail then I think it's a harder
Sure.
it's a harder thing to swallow, you know, having that height difference right there on that corner. But you know, the retail will be there, that area will be there. It's just the architectural enhancements are what you hope to see on something like this that makes it interesting to look at in some place you want to go, you want to walk by, you want to look at it, rather than, whoa, this is enormous and boxy and kind of, you know, so
Yeah, I
that's the
agree
point I
with
was
you.
trying to make.
I think that, you know, to that point, what allows us to be able to put money into the architectural design is obviously income, right? We've got to offset our cost with income. So the more income I take out of my building, the harder it is for me to offset, to be able to offset my costs with the income, if that makes sense. And so, in all honesty, the more leasable space that I have, the more income I have to be able to justify cost into the building. So it's sort of a case against the step back and decreasing efficiency and taking income away from what is a set piece of ground. But I agree with you, and we've taken a lot of time and effort to try to make the building feel historic. I mean, we're trying to make it look like levels 1 through 3, and even going down Center Street have that red brick, and it's this old historic building that's been there, and we're adding something new and modern that's sort of come up and being built into it. And so this is the direction that we plan on going with our building. And so I don't know if you need some type of assurances from me that we'll build something substantially similar to this. It's our intent to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Strachan?
So which of the two versions of this building are you looking at, this one or the earlier one?
The earlier one.
Not the 20-foot step back, but there was another version of.
Yeah. So that one there. So that one there is 1 foot at the corner and 2 feet after the white, that white part, you know, and then it steps back 2 feet. And again, this angle really doesn't help you articulate it. That would be my preferred because, again, it starts eating into our units. But, man, rather than a 20-foot step back, I would much prefer. So here's goes 1 foot to here, and then it steps back 2 along through here. But if it's a question of, you know, 5 or 20, of course I'll take the 5 because I could actually, even though these units will be less functional all the way through here, at least they're units, right?
What's the size of your balconies on the other two levels? Are those 5-foot balconies coming out then? So what's
Yeah, so the way the code is written is that 50% of the units have to have a balcony. Right now, 100% of our units have a balcony. All the units on the back side and on the opposite side have balconies. These are 5-foot balconies, 5 by 10s, because on the ones that, on 50% of them, they have to be 50 feet, correct? So these out here are 5-foot balconies.
And so this picture would also show basically a 5-foot balcony on that.
This one here, yes.
Down the
yeah,
next.
so this steps back 5, and these protrude out 5. Again, if you just going to, does this thing work anymore? Can I, let's see.
Did it get turned off?
Maybe. Well, the laser pointer's working, but not the slides. Would you mind just going to my last slide that shows the unit? Go up one more, right there. See, again, I'm sorry to reiterate this point, but so there's that 2-foot balcony that's there. If we come back another 3 feet, I'm gonna have to take units out of the whole body. So I'll end up taking maybe a foot here and a foot here and a foot there or something. But that additional 3 feet's gonna make that, instead of 755 feet, I'll be something less than that. And, 3 by 17, so I'll be about 700 square feet. And I would prefer not to do that, but again, that's better than having a line back here, right? So.
Mr. Stewart.
To address Kim's concern, normally when we make an adjustment to standards, we ask for a development agreement to guarantee these things happening. We don't know what 2007 is going to happen next week. Something could happen in the economy that would change the dynamics of this project. And if we don't have anything, we have pictures today, but we have no guarantee of what those pictures are going to be what we have built. So at least in the past, we've had development agreements where we've made adjustments to zoning and other considerations.
We could do that. We could also, if you needed to approve this based on the renderings, the finished product being substantially similar to our renderings, something like that.
Looks like Mr. Jones has a comment here. Thank you.
I can't speak beyond the last 6 years, but it has not been our practice in the last 6 years to do development agreements for text amendments. We routinely do them with zone changes.
It was zoning we did. When we did zoning, we made.
Yes. Yeah. We've routinely used them for zone changes.
Right.
We just haven't used them before for a text amendment to an ordinance, which is what is proposed here. And again, I don't know that I can stand up and say we can't do that. I think it's a novel use of them, and I think I've expressed my opinion before that Provo's use of development agreements is already novel. But there may be some way to do that if that's the.
How do you guarantee you're going to get what you see?
Well, that's
make a text amendment. What guarantee do you have?
You don't have a guarantee. I mean, I think the way the short answer, which Bill will love, is that you put whatever standards you want in the zone, so that the zone guarantees that you'll get what you want. So.
Thank you, Mr. Pepperoni. I have a quick question for you. So, Mr. Christensen originally requested this change in step back just for the area between 100 East and 200 East. And then I noticed when it went to Planning Commission, they're saying, well, why don't we do that all the way down? And I can't remember, was that your original recommendation also, or which of the two would you prefer and why?
We would prefer keeping the application narrow, like Mr. Christensen has requested. While there is some safety in the historic district from First East to Third West, and the Landmarks Committee having jurisdiction over that, we would prefer to keep the application narrow, like Mr. Christensen has suggested.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, while he's up, could I ask a quick question? Sure. Is 6 stories the maximum that we have in this area?
DT1 is 100 feet, which I think is going to be 6 stories.
Okay.
DT2 is 180 feet, quite a bit higher.
Okay. But this is DT1?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any council members that would like to? Okay, go ahead.
I'm Brody Horton. I didn't come tonight prepared to make comment, but as I've been listening to the discussion, a couple of thoughts that I wanted to just point out. As a Provo resident, as well as a downtown business owner, leasing space in the historical district on Center Street, a couple of thoughts that have been shared that really resonate with me. One is the idea that having a 20-foot step back adds to the building, making it feel more historic or adding to the historical nature of the area. I actually think that the building to the east, where that 20-foot step back has been implemented, looks rather awkward. And I don't think it adds at all to the value of the historical buildings nearby. The second point I wanted to make is that as we have renovated a space in the historical district on Center Street, restoring windows that had been previously covered up 30 years ago, unprompted, we haven't done any marketing, we don't plan to rent it for residential use, but because those windows sit the step back there, it's only the second story, but there's no step back, and they're so close to Center Street, and you get the feel of the vibe of Center Street. We have had many inquiries of residents wanting to take residence in that space. That's not our plan, but I know that if you remove that step back 20 feet back, those units on levels 4, 5, and 6 have a considerable less view of the city and of Center Street and the nature of it. Instead, they're looking at a balcony of 20 feet, which could be used for, considerable use for other things out there as a patio, I imagine. But you instead that unit, especially on that 4th floor, has no view. Their view will be whatever is happening on that patio, on that balcony. And I think that actually makes the architectural rendering. I prefer that. That I know that the people who have come to us have expressed interest in feeling, if they're interested in high density housing downtown, their interest is to be part of downtown and not be stepped back 20 feet from the city. So, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to share my thoughts at this point. First of all, I really like the project. I think it looks great. I think it serves a market that there's a lot of demand for. Love all the retail on the bottom. And it seems to me that it's a reasonable request to treat that block differently than the rest of Center Street. So I'm supportive of that. I might even be okay extending it as the Planning Commission is recommended, but I'm a little uncertain about that part of it. So my preference at this point would be to just do the incremental approach and approve the original request to just make the change between First and Second East. To have the way it was originally proposed, could you bring that up again, just for clarity?
1 or 2 foot setback, is that what you're saying? Is that
let's just let's see what the applicant's proposed amendment says here.
No required?
Oh, no required step back in the building facade elevation. So
2 foot.
And the Planning Commission added, okay, I missed that. So they recommended 1 foot as opposed to no step back, but extending it all the way along Center Street. Okay.
It's between 100 and 200 east.
Okay, now I'm really confused because I thought the Planning Commission recommended extending this. No, they didn't. Okay. So when it says, so this summary here, when it says buildings in the general downtown DT1, it left out that qualifier that we're only talking about between First and Second East.
Yeah, so what you see right here on the screen is what the Planning Commission's recommendation is to the council. Some of the background on it is that they put in the 1 foot as opposed to the applicants from the previous slide to just keep 1 foot to help maintain that architectural expression line in there to help with some of those same things that have been talked about today. So that was the intent, I believe, of the Planning Commission to apply it just for that block, the same as what the applicant requested. The only difference is that it would have a 1 foot setback instead of a 0 foot.
Okay, I misremembered that. I read that a long time ago. So I'd support the Planning Commission recommendation then with the 1 foot.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Santiago.
But the rendering shows a 1 foot setback on the cornice and then a 2 foot setback. And is that what you would plan to do, or?
Yes, and that was the discussion that we had with Planning Commission also, and I think for simplicity's sake, they probably just went with 1 foot. Yeah, that corner elevation is 1, and then it steps back 2 after you get around that corner element, and it goes to 2 feet.
And that's what you would plan to do. So, okay. So we could change the wording of this to to be 2 feet? Or no, because you need 1 foot on the cornice,
Corner.
and then you do the 2 feet on that
So will the
street that faces
balconies
center?
go out over the sidewalks then?
A little bit. They'll go out about a foot or 2 feet over the sidewalk. But if you look at that number one, that's permitted by the code. But also if you look at the retail rendering, we have those awnings on the retail that go out on the main level. Do you know what I'm talking about? So you can see the awnings that kind of go out over the sidewalk on the retail level. So on those the balconies that are way up there, so it's stepped back 2 feet. So I guess they'll go out over 3 feet out over the edge of the building. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's awkward, we can pull those back and put the big balconies on the back of the building. I'm okay either way with that.
But on the first floor, you have an awning that goes out in the rendering.
Mm-hmm.
And how far does that go out?
This, I don't, to be honest, I'd have to ask my architect how far that goes out there. That one looks like it's probably only 3 feet or so. But I think that they go out long. You see some of these on the side look much bigger.
But it looks like the balcony above would not stick out farther than that projection below.
No. These stick out much further down here, yes.
I personally like the 5-foot balcony from the view to the center street because that's where your view is. You put them on the backside, that's not going to be that.
Yeah.
That's not where your view is.
Yeah.
To me, it's more looking out at the buildings and the temple and those.
Oh, absolutely. Those people there will have a stunning view of the temple.
And that's why I almost like even a 5 foot on that, just a 5 foot setback. I appreciate what you're trying to do here. But those units would be so nice with, just go out in evening time
I agree.
and have your view there.
Yeah, it'll be really pretty. And I agree with what the gentleman said. I think you step it back, it's going to be harder to see out over, so.
I agree with that.
I don't know who else wants to comment, but I'm ready to vote, and I'm inclined to vote for this as the text amendment for 1 foot.
Mr. Stewart?
I'd be willing to vote for it if I knew we could get what we're seeing. I have no idea that this will actually happen because we can't in any way guarantee a text amendment, so I'm going to have to vote against.
Any other comments?
So this has yet to go before design review.
It's in design review right now.
So the project plan is currently being reviewed by city staff, and then once it meets all the requirements, then it would be put on the design review agenda to be reviewed.
So I know you can't predict or handicap, but based on the nice-looking presentation, what do you think the chances are that design review, it would come out of design review looking about the same way?
Well, I think a lot of the elements that have been discussed would be required by code, like the architectural expression line, if the planning commission's recommendation is what is decided upon, that would maintain that. The balconies that have been discussed are something that's required in the downtown zone, and those are allowed to overhang on the street that's in the current downtown zone. So a lot of those things are already built into our design standards and the downtown zone. And so with those elements and then going to design review for their recommendation as well, those are all things that I think should work. Whether or not a different material gets used or something, that's something we can't guarantee, but there are certain things that are required that they'd have to meet. So
when it goes to design review, would our comments as we discuss and vote for this also be forwarded on to them?
Yeah, so staff will present to them, and that's something that staff could relay, that whatever those desires were from the council were talked about and highly desired, so that they are aware of them in their decision. And then the project plan itself still has to go back to planning commission. We're just looking at the ordinance amendments right now. So design review will review it. They make a recommendation to the planning commission for the project plan itself.
Remind me then, once it goes through those two processes, we're going to get what we see.
What's that?
Once it goes through the design review and project review, we're going to get what we see today.
Yeah, so if the project plan goes to the, through design review, gets approval from
Right.
them and goes to planning commission, then that's what they've been approved to build. If they want to change it, they'd have to go back through that process again to change something on it.
So as I was listening, George, it seemed like the texture and the color may change, but the form is generally prescribed by the ordinance and what we're allowing here with the 2-foot, 1-foot setback. So is that true that the form is relatively prescribed?
Yeah, so in the downtown zone, the setback, that's in there. In the downtown zone, there's a maximum setback, so the building itself isn't going to be pushed back more than what's allowed by the code. The step back is a minimum requirement, so if the applicant did want to do a 20-foot step back, they could change that, but again, they'd have to just meet whatever the ordinance is, so. Yeah, so there currently is a project plan that the city's reviewing, and that's what sparked the ordinance amendment, was that there was a requirement that the city noted in the code that said you have to have a 20-foot setback according to the current code, and then that sparked the applicant's ordinance amendment application to come through, so.
Thank you. And I'd just like to make a comment so my colleagues don't think I'm losing my mind. I looked up the staff report here, and it wasn't the Planning Commission that recommended extending it, but it was actually staff. Staff feels that the step back requirement could be removed for all of the DT1 zone and not just the 100 East to 200 East block. So I guess all I'm trying to say there, if even staff is questioning whether we still need that downtown, I'm just very comfortable with removing it in this little piece here, which is different than the rest anyway. So, any other comments?
Just one final one. I'm looking on Street View, looking east from probably University, from University, and 63 East does go up the 6 stories, but it does have the 20-foot step back. This will be the only building on that side of Center Street that has the frontage that's on Center Street going up the full 6 stories. So this one will be different than everything else.
Any further comments? So, Mr. Jones, since there's 2 versions, I would assume we don't have an implied motion on this, or do we? Or would we treat the Planning Commission as the default?
That's correct. What came to you was the Planning Commission's recommendation, and so that's what was drafted for the implied motion.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So if there's no further comment, I will call for a vote on the implied motion, which is the Planning Commission recommendation that is currently shown on the screen. All in favor? So that's Mr. Connect, Mr. Sewell, Ms. Santiago, and Mr. Winterton in favor, and all opposed. Mr. Harding and Mr. Stewart opposed. Thank you. So let's move on to item number 13, which is an ordinance amending Provo City Code to reduce the average apartment square footage from 800 to 600 feet in the general downtown and DT1 and downtown core DT2 zones. And this will be presented by Dustin Wright.
Okay, thank you. So this item also is for this same property. The applicant has requested this ordinance amendment to reduce the existing the existing average unit size in the downtown 1 zone. His request would be that projects that have a mixed-use development on the ground floor would qualify to have that existing 800 square foot average reduced down to 600 square feet. The Planning Commission has reviewed this as well. And if we can go to the next slide, the Planning Commission's recommendation was to apply it not only to the DT 1 zone, but the DT 2 zone as well. That the same 500 square foot minimum average size, or that the 500 square foot minimum size would stay the same, but the average size would be reduced from 800 to 600 feet in both those zones. And so if that's essentially what the ordinance amendment is for. If there's questions, I'd be happy to answer those as well.
Mr. Connect?
Okay, so we have the applicant's desire, we have the Planning Commission's recommendation, and remind me where staff was.
Yes, staff is supportive of the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Thank you.
Can you explain why?
Yeah, so in the downtown zones, previously there was, a while back, there wasn't a minimum there. Earlier this year, there was an ordinance amendment that established those minimums to help with some issues that were being seen with a lot more concentration of micro units that were being proposed to come into the downtown zones, and also for there was a lot more pressure in the interim transit-oriented development zone, the ITOD zone, for these smaller units, for more low-income housing. There was already a large concentration down in that area of. So that amendment came and was approved to help us reestablish some minimums to prevent some of those things from happening. And so that has helped, I think, with the area down in the interim transit area there. But then in our downtown zones, it was something that we knew at some point would come back and be something that we'd need to have more discussion on with the applicant's project that he's proposing, that brought that discussion through his ordinance amendment to have that now. And so, yes, staff is comfortable with that recommendation to be able to have that reduction in the downtown zones, and not just for both downtown zones and not just the downtown 1 zone.
Mr. Connect?
So the applicant's original request would focus this on Center Street if you had commercial storefront space as part of the project?
Correct.
And what I like about that focus is that it doesn't apply everywhere in the DT1, DT2. Now, we have projects that are being approved in Orem that are market rate, and they're a variety, kind of a 50-50 mix between 1 and 2 bedrooms. The current project before us has very few, maybe 1 or 2, is just a couple of 2 bedrooms, and you know, right on Center Street, that might be a good mix or fit. But to say that that's what we want all through DT1 and DT2, I'm not prepared personally to go down that road without some assurance that we're going to be having a variety of housing. And the Planning Commission's recommendation is actually not encouraging a variety of housing. And so I would like to keep this focused as per the applicant's original limited focus, until we get a better feel on how things are being proposed and developed downtown. And you know, it means more meetings where someone comes in and says, okay, we got a project and they would like to make it work by doing this or that to the ordinance. And I would rather give it out incrementally than just say, oh yeah, forget the 800. Because the 800, I think, serves a purpose. But in this case, I'm willing to go with Center Street being the focus of what will end up being one-bedroom, a majority one-bedroom units built in these projects. And so that's kind of how I'm seeing it right now.
Thank you. Does the applicant have any comments to make on the unit size issue?
Yes, I do. And I know that we're here so late, and I appreciate everybody's time. But I do have some information that I just want to go through on this, if you guys don't mind. And I'll go through it quickly. Basically, bugger. It's not working. There we go. Okay, let's see. Am I doing that or are you doing that? You are? Okay. So we don't need to go through all of this, but just go back for 1 second. So this is I know that you haven't adopted the Provo City Vision 2050, but there are a couple things in here that I think are really important. Number one is encouraging the development of market rate housing. The second is encouraging infill developments and multifamily denser housing stock in areas surrounding retail trade areas to increase demographic figures to provide a larger consumer base for current and future retailers. So the idea is, look, we want to encourage multifamily development in and around retail areas to bring people in and to promote mixed-use developments and to have more income, which I get. And then on the next one, understanding growth projections and finding suitable housing options for young married students and postgraduate professionals, which is also kind of the focus of downtown. So how do you find suitable housing for young marrieds and student housing, which really are millennials? And then the last thing would actually be, look at the long-term health of neighborhoods. And so if you could go to the next slide. So how do we encourage market rate housing? Basically, the impetus for basically this project, the whole reason why we went through this is because we saw what was happening south of campus and in and around BYU. And in fact, I lived in one of these homes. It was just homes south of BYU that were full of students. And so what you end up with is in an area that should be single-family homes, you've got students and postgraduate professionals or postgraduates and single working professionals. They're all living down there, and there's no anchor families in the area. So who are the occupants? We went through that. Why do they want to stay in downtown Provo? Basically, because once people graduate, if they're not married, they want to stay down in the social scene. Even if they are married, they want to continue with, to live in the area where they've got friends and established relationships, finding employment, and to be part of Provo's culture. And why do they rent single-family homes? And basically, they rent single-family homes because there's very little market rate housing in the downtown core. As a result, they're forced to live in these homes or places like Belmont and stuff like that. So if you go to the next slide. So again, this is from a market study that we did, and 57% of renters in Provo, Orem area are ages 15 to 34, which are basically millennials. And so the renter pool is really young. Next slide, please. 45% of renters in the Provo, Orem area are 1- and 2-person households. So they're not families by and large. Almost 50% aren't families. They're single working professionals. They're young married couples with no children. And in some cases, roommates like these batching singles. Next slide, please. And this is the most important, I think, slide here. 65% of the rental housing stock is made up of one unit. So 40% of the housing stock are single family homes, 10% are townhomes, and 10% are duplexes, 15% are townhomes. Only 5% of the entire rental housing stock is a 50 or more unit complex like Red Sky. So there's very little market rate housing for millennials, and as a result, they're renting homes, becoming batching singles and things like that. So the question is, what does Red Sky do to benefit or to help out this situation? If you can go to the next slide. Basically, we believe that by building Red Sky, it'll take a lot of those people out of those neighborhoods, put them into housing that they actually want to live in, and it will free up those homes to be bought, rehabbed by families. I think that's the evolution of where things will go if you continue to provide market rate housing in the downtown urban core. And this demographic is just, they're your kids, basically. BYU and UVU grads, they're nieces and nephews and that sort of thing. Now, having, obviously the unit average plays into this because it's critical to be able to develop market rate housing. Why don't you go ahead to the next slide, please? So how do we encourage infill development? Again, this is what our site currently looks like. In my opinion, it's basically a blight. And so what do we do to see things turned around? Go to the next slide, please. You can go to the next one and the next one, sorry. So really, we are adding 10,000 square feet of retail. You can go to the next one. Yeah, next slide, thanks. So in this area, retail, this is why, to your point, Mr. Connect, why I think that along Center Street where there actually is a requirement to put in retail, why I think that it's helpful to have a lower average, because we're not required to put in retail, but we're adding 10,000 square feet of retail to the area, which I think is a huge investment in downtown Provo. I don't see that happening anywhere else. We really believe that it'll act as an anchor. We think that not only will the 130 units enliven and enrich and cause other people to shop down there, but I think if we have R&R barbecue, or if we have someone that's, like the developers are Communal and 180 Tacos and things like that, if they open up another concept down here, I think it'll pull people just like an anchor tenant would all along Center Street down to that corner, and it will help, just like in a shopping mall, the way an anchor helps little tenants that are outside Nordstrom's and things like that. It basically raises the level of the water in the entire bay. And so, however, right now, our units average about 650 square feet or so. If I were to take all of that 10,000 retail square footage and put it into residential and just convert all the retail to residential, we're actually closer to about 750 square foot per unit. And so we get actually closer to the average. So what I'm saying is if you take out, if we have retail as an offset, we need smaller units. I don't know if that makes sense to you, if you understand what I'm saying by that, but what I mean is, if I were to convert all 10,000 square feet of retail, I'd be able to to residential, I'd be able to pretty much get to that unit average. But because we're choosing to bring retail in, our unit average goes down a little bit. But at the end of the day, this development, Red Sky, by adding 10,000 square feet, we are bringing in retail, and by adjusting that minimum unit average, it will help us to accomplish the goals that are set out in the Provost vision. Next slide, please. Those are just, you can see when I talk about acting as an anchor, you've got sort of Restaurant Row that's in through there, and it would continue to pull people down to that site. You can go ahead to the next one. So this is just the demographic of millennials and what it is that they're looking for. And I know that what I want to point out here is millennials are that demographic that fill up Provo, basically, right? They make up half of the renter population. These 1 and 2 bedroom households make up half of the whole renter pool. So that is the market that we're catering to down in this area. And they want to live in this area. That's why they stay down here. That's why when they graduate, they don't leave. They want to be here, even if it means living in a basement somewhere. And it's because they love the amenity, they love being a part of the social scene and everything else, but the housing that they're looking for is an apartment building that can provide the amenities that they're looking for, give them a sense of community. And when I say sense of community, it's not just the amenities that are inside the building, it's being able to walk to all of the restaurants and everything else around Provo. Flexibility, and then convenience. It's being able to work and get on BART and well, not BART, but the front runner and bus commuter that's coming in, all those other things. Plus, they don't want to be able to have to maintain homes and yards and pay taxes and that kind of thing. So next slide, and this is the most important part. So millennials are looking for an affordable apartments with functional layouts. While older generations typically look for larger apartments, millennials are comfortable with efficiently designed studios and one bedrooms. In fact, according to Forbes, studios and one-bedroom apartments now comprise 54.4% of the apartment rental market due to millennial demand. So studios and one-bedrooms make up half of the rental market because millennials are saying we can get by with less as long as the price per square foot for the apartment isn't as important to millennials as the total cost of the apartment. They're willing to live with less square footage if the rent meets their monthly budget needs. Millennials are also less likely to own a car. This trend has less to do with being green and more to do with choosing exactly where they want to spend their money. Millennials prefer to spend their money on experiences, and they place an emphasis on their personal lives over their work lives. Since fewer millennials own cars in previous generations, they prefer housing locations that have good walkability. That's red sky. Okay, next slide. So the point is they're willing to have less square footage as long as the rent meets their needs, because they want disposable income to travel and to do all the other things that millennials are doing these days. And so if I were to break this down, a 600 square foot unit at $1.60 a square foot, which is par, it's actually maybe even a little bit on the low end for downtown, it's approximately $960 a month, right? Well, an 800 square foot unit for a single working professional or a newlywed is on the low end $1.45 and on the high end $1.60. And so that's either $11.60 a month or $12.80 a month. So that's a difference of $200 to $300 a month, or $2,400 to $3,800 annually. That's important to them. They can use that to travel. They can use that on food. They use that for their life experiences, and it's important for them to meet their budget. So an average annual increase basically is a lot. And so reiterating the fact that millennials are willing to live with less square footage if the rent meets their monthly budget needs. So next slide. And that's about it. The unit plans, you've seen these before. We don't have any micro units. Our smallest unit is just over 500 square feet. If you go to the next slide, it shows a 3D rendering of it. And our smallest unit is maybe my favorite unit. It has a ton of windows. We got a bike rack in every unit. They're extremely functional, full walk-in closet, full bath. It's a great unit. Island. The next one, our next unit is 755 square feet. If you go to the 3D image, that also is a great unit. You've got the den, the bedroom, and the office. I think most of you guys have seen this. And then our 2-bedroom unit, which we don't have, admittedly, we don't have very many of those. That's on the next slide, and I don't have a 3D rendering of this, but it's a very, very good rendering. That basically is the tower element on the building that we've talked about that's almost solid glass. That's those 2-bedroom units. And so I think that should be, if you go to the next slide, that's it. Yes.
So let's talk parking.
Okay.
What's your ratio?
So our ratio is we meet the city standard, but we have, sorry, that's one thing I didn't come prepared for. We are parked obviously more than one bedroom or one stall per unit, but I think we have, do you remember, Dustin? Sorry, I didn't come prepared to talk parking, but I know that we have we've got 130 units, and I think that we have 150 something stalls, maybe? Something like that.
Okay, and the reason I ask is you may pick up a fair number of young marrieds. So there's a real dearth of that kind of housing. I mean, you could say they're millennials, whatever, but if they're both married and both have a car, like Startup Crossing, you may experience that.
Right, and I'm working with the staff on looking at really creative ways to reduce our traffic footprint. So in our building, every unit has to have an in-unit bike rack. So you could see in those 3D renderings, we've got bikes hanging on the walls. Most of the units have 2 bike racks. The little tiny units only have 1. We also have, in our structured parking, a bike station that stores outdoor bikes, like a dirt bike, or not a dirt bike, but a mountain bike, and a cleaning station where you can wash it off and clean it. We also have a bike repair shop. In addition to all of the parking stalls, we also have, I want to say, 12 maybe scooter stalls. I can't remember, maybe, no, 16. I think we have 16 stalls for scooters and motorcycles, and which also isn't included in count. And then, you know, part of our thought is with the bus station that is coming down right through University Avenue, they can walk anywhere. I mean, you can literally walk to the bus, take a bus to you know, wherever your employment is, or you can walk over to Front Runner, take a bike to Front Runner. So we think that that'll be a benefit to our site.
Mr. Stewart?
So you have 130 units. How many parking spaces?
I didn't come prepared with that.
Pretty important.
Yes, it is. Of course it is. Parking is, yes, important.
I had no idea.
I think we have close to 150 stalls, but I don't remember offhand.
Can staff tell us what the requirement is? Because you would have to have at least that many.
It's 1 per 1 unit and 1.25 per 2 if we meet certain other creative traffic reducing criteria. Is that right?
Sorry, I didn't come prepared to talk about the parking either, but as a part of the project plan that is in a separate application, the parking that's required in the downtown zone where this is being addressed, and then they'd have to meet those existing requirements for parking. And I'm sorry, I don't recall off the top of my head what those numbers were, but that's part of their project plan. We'd have to ensure that they meet the parking requirements as well.
A one-bedroom unit has to have one parking space. That's 126, and you've got 8 more, so that's 134 parking spaces.
Yeah, again, I can't recall what the numbers were, but it's
Might even
whatever's
be less.
established in the current.
We're going to hope
existing
the bicyclists, they're going to ride bicycles and not have 2 cars.
Sorry, say that one more time. I didn't understand what you said.
So you were saying we're going to be hoping that they ride bikes, right?
Yeah, we're hoping like we hoped in a lot of other things. Let me, if I can make some other. My understanding was from your presentation, McKay, there's 45% was young married and singles, right?
45% are, 1 and 2 bedroom households make up 45% of the rental pool.
What about the other 55%?
The other 55% are, we go back to that slide, but they are over 2 bedroom households, 3, 4, 5 families, more or less.
So you're basically attracting some of the 45%.
I think that, yes, of that, I think that we are targeting single working professionals. This is sort of, you know, you've got a lot of the batching singles that are out there where they team up and they live together. We are going after a similar demographic, only these are the type of people that just want to live by themselves. They want to have their own space.
They
could
have up to 3 singles.
No. We're not having
The ordinance.
3 single bedrooms.
No.
3 single people.
In a 1-bedroom unit.
I don't know. All I know is what's allowed.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't thought of that, honestly. We don't intend to lease. One of the things that we're actually trying to avoid is we don't want to get into a situation where we have a 2 and a 3 and a 4-bedroom unit where we're collecting rent from one person who is subleasing it to all of his buddies.
We're taking care of that.
Yeah. So we just are saying, look, you're a couple or you're one guy, and we're just leasing to that one guy or girl.
But you're assuming a couple's going to only have 1 car, probably.
I think that, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are couples who do have 2 cars. We've got tandem stalls that aren't included in our parking count, and we are to some extent relying on our market data, which says that most have 1, and that if they're renting in our place, they're renting because they have 1 car and maybe 1 car and a scooter, or one car that the wife takes, and maybe the husband, whoever works, takes the bus to work.
You're aware in startup crossing the same regulation occurs, but most people have 2 cars.
I think in Utah, parking or having cars is obviously different than it is in other downtown markets. But based on our data, we feel very confident that we're going to be adequately parked.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Christensen before we entertain public comment? If there's any public left here, I guess there is. All right, we'll open it up for public comment. Welcome. Jeremiah Mon.
Jeremiah Mon, Mapleton. I just wanted to, just echo a little bit about what he said. So really, he and I ought to just swap our data, because you're right, there is a demographic there that would definitely rent this. When we did our research, our particular group was primarily those who would want to group together, but there is definitely a group in our research that we're looking for smaller units, and this would be more appealing to what they're looking for. As some of you guys know, in our ratio, like everybody we have has cars, but in our Riverview project, our one-bedroom units, of the 16 one-bedroom units that are in there that are kind of going to be a little comparable to this, of the 16 units, 7 of them do rent a second spot from us, just if you're kind of curious about those numbers, because those are our young married couples. But I think this is a good project because one of the things, my primary reason for talking was because I do have a concern with the average size units, because I think that when you dictate average size, that means the developer can't actually customize the project for what the market needs. One of the things that we found when we built our project was that really, one bedrooms are what were needed. We threw in 2 just to get a mix, but it's the 1 bedrooms that rented in 2 weeks. It was the 2 bedrooms that took 6 weeks or 2 months to get rented. And so I would definitely recommend, in my personal opinion, having lower average sizes, because it does give the developer the opportunity to build for the market need without having to build for an arbitrary ratio not necessarily arbitrary ratio, but a ratio that exists to, meet an idea, but not necessarily what the current market demand is. So that's all I would suggest.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the council for discussion. Mr. Connect.
So I think for me, the choice is whether the council wants to go with the Planning Commission's recommendation or with the original recommendation that was more restrictive and focused that the applicant put forward. And earlier I said I was partial to what the applicant was proposing. So I don't know how anyone else feels.
Could we clarify what the applicant's original proposal was?
So number 2 says it has to be a mixed-use development with ground floor commercial fronting Center Street. So it's very focused on just on Center Street and not throughout the DT1, DT2.
And the Planning Commission extended that to all of the DT1 and DT2. Okay, thank you. Other comments? Mr. Stewart.
I'll just repeat some of my comments I made in work meeting. I think reducing the average unit size from 800 to 600 feet has at least 2 or 3 results. Number 1, we'll have fewer 2-bedroom units without question. I think that reduces stability, because I think people that want to live in the same area, have a child, 1-bedroom usually doesn't work. Usually they want a separate bedroom. There's no question in my mind that more units equals more dollars for the developer. So if I was the developer, I would want more units because they've said that themselves, units equal dollars. I'm not sure units equal stability. I think without a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom units, at least 2 bedroom units in these developments, it's just going to reduce the stability in my estimation. Thank you.
Thank you.
George.
Mr. Connect?
George, with that said, I expressed my preference to the applicant's proposal based on partially what you brought up, that I didn't want this necessarily applied to all of DT1, DT2, but just along Center Street as originally asked for by the developer. And that would leave the rest of the DT1 and DT2 for projects that might be 1 and 2 bedroom.
So you're going to ask the other developers to make less money than this developer. We expect them to be more community-minded. Give us 2 bedroom units because we'd like them to.
Well, I'm just saying, right in Orem right now, they are getting a mix. Staff tells us that the market rate projects in Orem are coming in with a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom, about 50%.
I noticed when the staff gave us the figures before, we were the only city that had the majority of 1 bedroom units. We could pull it up again maybe.
Right, and so that's why I'm saying, for me, if I'm going to vote for this, I would go for the most restrictive, which is actually what the applicant asked for, rather than the planning commission, which just blanketed saying let's do it everywhere and reduce the average all the way down to
If I was the
6.
developer, I'd come back and say, you did it for McKay, how come you won't do it for me?
Well, because right here, it's not just for McKay, it's on Center Street, and you're getting commercial as part of the package. It's a mixed-use development.
We thought we were getting commercial along that development in the old Ream store where they had the ice sheet.
Good point. I think that's
Did
partly,
that commercial ever work out?
I think the location there was what probably killed that.
No, but that was a big selling point for us.
I remember that.
It didn't work out.
Other comments? Thank you. Mr. Harding.
I'm generally supportive of reducing the unit size in the downtown zones. I think there is something attractive, though, about having almost a performance bonus. I don't know if that's something that community development could work on, as they did with the parking ratios. Like, you can have reduced parking ratios if you do these certain things. Maybe ground floor commercial could be something that if they're willing to do that, then their unit sizes are reduced. So I'm okay with either.
I'm basically the same. I'm generally supportive of letting the market work in terms of unit sizes, and so I'd be okay with the broader, but I also like this is a performance bonus really here, and we do want to encourage more of this mixed use and ground floor commercial, so I'm fine with the applicant's original proposal. Mr. Parker, the administration's been awfully quiet tonight. Do you have anything from your end you'd like to add?
Well, I think generally speaking, when we come to land use items, we generally like to defer to the Planning Commission. We think that's the group authorized by statute to make specific recommendations to you, and so I think we're comfortable with either outcome here, and I think the Planning Commission was too, as you read the staff report. So I think they tended to see. Again, I think most of their concerns and the concerns they'd heard about the smaller unit sizes and higher densities tended to be in the TOD area, and they specifically excluded TOD from this reduction in average unit size. And so I think that's, but I think whether it's specifically limited to this block on Center Street or whether it's broader, Planning Commission, I think, felt good about both. I think there is some advantage to almost a test run at this, and the most you're going to get on that block is probably 2 projects like McKay's, if you get that. And you can have a good sense to see how it works and how the parking ratios work and what the tenant mix is, and before you make a decision to go to a much broader area.
Thank you, Mr. Parker.
So I would just add that it really, the applicant's proposal would allow for this on more than just his block, as I read it.
It's only 100 to 200.
Does it say that?
It's on Center Street.
This one is on Center.
Just fronting on the, all the way up and down Center. So I think that's a fairly broad testing ground.
Not as broad as the full DT.
Right, right.
Just one other comment. I forgot to add parking. I'm concerned about the parking ratios. We're gonna be talking about this 2 years or 3 years from now, that we're having parking problems with this development, because 1 to 1 just hasn't worked out for young married couples. I have 7 grandchildren that are married. All has 2 cars. Most of them going to school and working.
Thank you. Mr. Connect?
So George might be right. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. The differences on this project that may play in its favor is its market rate, and and there's a lot of ifs, but if it does attract a significant number of people that do want to live alone rather than BYU marrieds or young marrieds, so if it all fills up with marrieds, then yeah, we probably have a problem, because I'm not seeing a lot of people really riding the bike. But if there's some of these units that do fill up with just one person that wants a small unit to live in, they will only have the one car.
By the way, all of my grandkids have bikes too. They have 2 cars and 2 bikes.
Are there any other comments before we vote?
What are we voting on, I guess? Are we asking for an amendment, for a motion, or what? Or is there an applied?
The implied motion is the Planning Commission's broader recommendation, so if we'd like to go with the narrower applicant's proposal, we'll need a motion.
I would like to make that motion and have, so that we do get that little test period personally. And I would make the motion that we accept the applicant's proposal, make this the motion that we go for.
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Winterton. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Santiago.
And a question, so when you want to test, how big of a test? I mean, right now the language is all of Center.
I'm fine with all of Center at this point, because I do believe that that's a very unique market, and we'll see what we will get in that area. So I'm comfortable with Center.
There's a lot of historic buildings on Center, so there's not a lot that could be either developed or redeveloped. So it is a pretty small test slice.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion, which is basically just amending the default? Mr. Jones.
So for purposes of the illustration, since there is a motion and a second, this version on the screen is a proposal that would meet that motion. And it shows in here where I've taken out some stuff in the preamble. But Bryce, if you go into review and change it to final instead of final show markup. Yeah. Then if you scroll down to the bottom, you see what the applicant had originally proposed.
So this ends up only being in DT1 or 2?
DT1. So if you scroll down further, part 2 is now just the boilerplate at the end. The revisions to DT2 have been deleted.
So that narrows the focus.
And that's because Center Street's only in DT1, so if it's restricted to Center Street, there's no point in talking about DT2.
David?
Yes.
That goes from Center Street from where to where? From not from 10th West to 10th East, right?
So what are the limits east and west, the way it's worded now?
Well, the limits east and west are anywhere in Center Street that's within the DT1 zone, except that they also have to meet this requirement of having ground floor commercial.
And DT1 ends at what, 5th West, or?
I don't know, I'd look to somebody from,
So 500 west to 2nd East? Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor? So that's Mr. Winterton, Mr. Harding, Ms. Santiago, Mr. Sewell, and Mr. Connect in favor. All opposed? Mr. Stewart opposed with Mr. Van Buren excused. So I think that just changes the default. So now the implied motion is to pass the applicant's proposal as shown on the screen.
correct.
Is there any further discussion on the implied motion? All in favor? Those opposed? So the vote is the same as on the previous motion. Those in favor and opposed, and with Mr. Van Buren excused. Thank you all for your patience tonight. As we mentioned earlier, in work meeting, we voted to continue item 14, so we will not be discussing that tonight. That brings us to the end of our agenda. So if there's no objection, we will declare the meeting adjourned by unanimous consent.
Thank you all, I appreciate it.